Thanks for checking out the Minute Men Initiative podcast. We're glad to have you. This is an episode we have been working towards for a little while. It's kind of a daunting topic, and that topic is morality and its importance in society, and also the importance of protecting morality and not just letting it fall by the wayside. Today, Stephen and I sit down with Zeke Johnston of Patriot Bladesmithing and Ironworks, and the three of us just really talk about the importance of morality, why we need it in our society, what happens if you don't have it and if you ignore it. And we take a look at history and see what history can show us about past civilizations. And we really talk about how we think we can turn this thing around and get our society headed back in the right direction. So I'm really happy that you're here to check out the podcast. I think it's a really important topic that we're going over today, and I hope you enjoy it. Good morning, gentlemen. How are we doing?
Doing good.
Good, Jacob.
Yep.
Good, Steven. Good to see you guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad you're back. Dude, you might be the, is he now the all-time leading
He's leading
guest?
Again.
Oh, man. Is it 3?
Yeah, this will be
is it number
lucky
3?
number 3.
Lucky
Yeah.
number 3.
Oh, man.
So for those that are wondering who that sultry voice is over there, that would be Mr. Zeke Johnston of Patriot Bladesmithing and Ironworks. He's going to join us on something we have been working towards for a while. This is a topic we've been researching and working on. We've made reference to it in past episodes, I believe, but I think it's something that really needs to be discussed, and that is the importance of having and maintaining a moral society and just overall morality. It's a difficult topic because it's extremely loaded, especially since the three of us are professing Christians, and that obviously informs a lot of our morality. But with that being said, I think there is, regardless of your beliefs, I think there is a lot of importance in this, and I think it's an extremely valuable characteristic to maintain as well. And
Absolutely.
I think that without this, societies don't last.
Mm-hmm.
And more importantly, kind of leaning into that Minuteman readiness perspective, if you don't have a sense of morality, then you will not last either.
Yeah.
So
I think it kind of one of the key questions that everybody should ask, kind of regardless of, I think, their walk of life, is what is my foundation?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what's the foundation that I base everything else on? You know, upon what do I make decisions in life? You know, and there's a lot of talk of truth. You know, truth being something that finds its source in ourselves, right, as individuals and individual truth, and that becomes a very difficult thing really quickly, because in a country our size, you end up having over 330 million different ideas of what truth is, right?
Yeah.
And so I think really closely linked to the topic of morals is truth, and there's this kind of pervasive thought in our culture, and I think just kind of Western culture in general, that truth is a relative thing. But
right.
Not that this is a podcast on truth, but it's linked very closely to, you know, what is your foundation, and specifically the question that we're talking about today of morals.
Yeah. I mean, to me, truth is right in line with that. I mean, they run parallel to each other, because you have to understand what is the source of truth. What can we rely on in order to inform and guide our morals? You know,
right?
what is the straight line that all other lines adhere to or return to. And I think it's really important to understand that. But kind of in an overarching, I guess, intro to this, why do we decide to do it? Well, I think if you're like us and you pay attention to what's going on in the world, which I would wager that most of our audience does. Right.
Yeah.
I feel like if you were scrolling through the podcasts or whatever and you see Minutemen Initiative, you're like, I'm going to give that a listen. You're probably someone that that's, adjusted to a certain flavor.
Yeah. You're paying attention to what's going on in the country and probably the world.
Yeah. Maybe you clicked on it and you're like, this has nothing to do with Fallout 4. What's going on? But no, but I think it's pretty clear, or it should be clear. And I guess I'll say that too, that if you aren't aware, it's time to wake up a little bit, because it's clear that things are not what they used to be. Mm-hmm. And they're not just getting worse, but exponentially getting worse. And I don't want this to at all be a doom and gloom episode. I want to approach this with as much charisma and give it as much interest as we can, because I actually think there's really cool lessons we can learn from history. I think there's a lot of hope too. I don't think that
absolutely.
Like, our intention of doing this isn't to be like, repent, it's more like, hey guys, like there are a lot of good people left in the world. Lots of good people. That are just now kind of waking up. Now I do believe that we've been and when I say we, I'm referring because it's who I am referring to the Christian community and the church and those that would align themselves in that walk. We have been passive and silent for far too long.
Absolutely.
And I would go farther and say complacent. And I'm not calling anyone out, because I would include myself in that.
Yeah, me too.
In that statement. I think it's not until recently that, within the last couple of years, that I've really tried to be proactive. Mm-hmm. And I think, Zeke, you and I talked about this, but and I know, Stephen, you and I have talked about it because it's something our dad told us. But Zeke, you and I were talking about when you get into your 30s, it's like something happens. I think late 20s into early 30s, there's a kind of a shift. At least I experienced.
I did too, 100%.
And I think
I'm not in my 30s yet, guys. So
I know, but
you'll get there.
You're there, dude.
Just to really age myself for the audience. I'll be there in a couple weeks.
Yeah, you're basically 30.
Oh,
yeah,
that soon.
Yeah.
Yep.
Nice.
This old man over here.
Everyone
Steven
thinks I'm like about to be 40 or something. I think. But
we got this guy that
judging, but based on the sound of the voice, right?
We got this. No. we got a neighbor that such a fun guy. We'd like to have him on the podcast. But I remember when we first had him in the shop, he's like, "Man, guys, and he's in his late 50s. So he's like, guys our age." He's like pointing across at me. No. He's like, "Guys our age, we've been there, done that kind of thing." And it was like with a customer, and I just kind of went with it. And then, conversation kept going, and he looked over at me. He's like, "How old are you?" I was like, "I'm 32. He's like, "Really?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Oh, you got some miles on you, boy." I was like, nice. But yeah.
But I think, kind of getting back to what you were saying, I think it's not something that I tried. You talking about the conversations that we've had about getting into our 30s and stuff.
Yeah,
it's not like I want to make much of myself. So that's not the point.
Right.
The point is that when you reach your 30s, a lot of people gripe about how they feel. Thankfully, I feel great. I also eat pretty healthy and stuff. But it's like you start getting into your 30s, you start griping about how your body feels and how you've beat it up and stuff in your 20s and that sort of thing. there's something else that there's kind of a culmination of things. I think that when you hit your 30s, or in Stephen's case, you're about into your 30s, there's a culmination of things. There's life experience that you hopefully have had by that point. Or I should say not a culmination or a convergence of life experience, physical strength that you likely still have. Mm-hmm. And then I guess maybe I would say under life experience. Oh, and then just physical and mental maturity, right? That is kind of a result of some of your life experience. Life experience being the good and bad encounters you've had in life. Hopefully by that time you're married and have some children, which is a huge growing experience. And you've had enough things happen to you throughout your life that you're kind of everything is kind of peaked, if that makes sense. Not peaked as in you're ready to head down the other side of the mountain into old age, but everything is kind of hopefully in their prime.
Yeah.
At that point. And at least for myself, and I think with you, Jacob, we felt kind of this responsibility. I know I felt a responsibility that I didn't really have before.
Yeah.
I started realizing that this could be taken wrong. I don't want it to be taken wrong. I'm just going to go for it. People start actually caring what you think. They actually start hearing what you have to say. People in their 20s who are seeking wisdom will come ask you for things, kind of look up to you and follow you around even. There's like a couple of young guys in the community. I say follow me around. It sounds a little weird, but there's a couple of young guys in the community that I'm friends with, like in their 20s. Like almost 20 and early 20s.
Yep.
And this, I'm not saying this in any kind of a degrading sort of way, but they look up to me maybe based on my skill set or a level of maturity or something that they maybe don't yet have, but they will.
Right.
And life experience. And they go, I feel like I can learn something from him. And I try to be really open. I mean, it can be a bad thing, but I try to be pretty open with my life and the things that I've learned and experiences I've had, because I want other people to maybe benefit from how I've screwed up or the difficulties I've had. Right.
Yeah.
So there's kind of, with that convergence of life experience and hopefully maturity and physical strength, you're kind of in your prime and you really have something to offer.
Right.
And so with that being the case, it just so happens that we live in our 30s in this time and in this place in our culture, right?
Yep.
And it's a time in which we can't waste what God has given to us.
Agreed.
Right?
Yeah, I think too. I really like the direction you're going with it, because, and I want to go ahead and say really quick that this isn't we're not saying this as a prerequisite. This is exactly what you just said, Zeke. This is just an explanation of where the three of us are.
Right. Yeah.
So if you are in your early 20s and you're listening to this, or you're in your, you're a young adult, or if you're in your, 50s, it doesn't matter.
Right.
The time to act is now, and we need to, and that was a big catalyst for me. It was growing up through my 20s and going, man, somebody's got to do something about this. Somebody's got to, man, this is getting, what in the world? Why is no one doing something about this? Somebody's got to do something. And then the last few years, I said, it's me. I need to do something about this. This is on me.
It's not the fact.
I can't wait on anybody else.
It's not the fact. Just to clarify, it's not the fact that I think I'm a wise old sage. It's the fact that I feel like I have the ability to maybe do something about the culture. I maybe have a couple things I can say, and it is my responsibility as I'm 35. I'm the old guy of us three. It is my responsibility to do it. And I frankly don't see, this is a little bit of a blanket statement, but I frankly don't see a lot of other people, and I'm going to pick on the Christian community specifically, I see a lot of people in their churches, and I see very few people putting what they're learning in their churches to practice. And I'm just gonna blanket statement churches, right?
The Sunday Christian.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's where it begins, and that's kind of where it ends. And they think that ministry and the Christian life happens within those four walls.
Yeah.
And if you read the Bible, you'll see that the majority of the Bible is written outside of a church. It's written about things that took place outside of a church or a synagogue. It is what happened in daily life. And
yeah.
I think we live in a time in which we are having to play catch up in a big way on this issue. I kind of think, I think leading up to this podcast, we talked about, you guys invited me to do it with you, and we kind of talked about it, and it was a way bigger, more complicated issue than we imagined. And it wasn't that we didn't understand where we stood on the issue of morality, but sometimes having a belief system is entirely different from breaking it down and explaining it and articulating what that belief system is to someone else.
Right.
Right. And so it took some digging to kind of understand and kind of parse out morality in culture.
Well,
and the effects of it being in culture and the lack thereof. Yeah.
Well, I think too that it was the realization that it's such a pivotal part of a society,
right?
And it directly influences its success or destruction. Absolutely. And I think that is vitally important to understand. And if you're listening to this right now and you're like, I'm just not seeing it, well, then maybe you're not ready to consume it. But I would encourage you to. Yeah, I would encourage you to bear with us, because we're just kind of trying to preface this thing and kind of give an outline of why we see its importance and why it's really important to us. I think it's important to be able to make a change. It's important to understand what needs to be changed. You can't just make a change to make a change.
That's right. Yeah.
And I think the best way to change something is to start by looking at yourself and trying to figure out how you could be better. Jordan Peterson says often, you got to clean your room before you can change the world.
I was thinking the exact same thing. Yeah.
Which basically just means, like, if your life is a mess, like if you can't even keep your regular life in order, your day-to-day mundane, no, not Monday, that sounds mean, but your day-to-day life that you actually control, if you can't even keep that in order, then why do you think you're going to be able to solve like a world issue like, I don't know. I'll use something that our audience might be familiar with, like voter fraud.
Yes.
It's like, these things are real and these things exist, but there's a deeper issue. And I think the deeper issue is our society's sense of morality. Yeah. The traditional family is being absolutely decimated. And tore apart. And it's important to understand that this is intentional. It's not.
That's right.
This is not, that's sad. And no, this is an intentional, it's more sinister than that. It's an intentional effort, because the traditional family with traditional morals, people teaching right and wrong, people teaching personal responsibility, hard work, working for something. These are all attributes that are being intentionally destroyed in our society. Right. And a good way to do that is the complete degradation of morality. And it's being done.
We've lost who we are. We've lost who we are as a nation. And even more important, more sadly, we've lost who we are as individual people. And when you live in a society, and I'm just going to say it, when you live in a society in which you can't even define who you are and what your gender is. That's the most basic. That's the most basic biological thing. You don't even know that about yourself, and you're so confused. How can you fix anything else about race and culture and government and economics? Like, how can you fix anything else?
Yeah.
If at the most basic level you're thoroughly confused, right? And we're there right now.
Yeah.
But there's been a slide down a slippery slope that's got us here.
Yeah.
Right. And there's, I don't know.
Well, let's jump into, just to kind of support our claim here. Well, let's jump into some, just some kind of, I guess, facts, because they're facts. In recent years, we've seen dramatic increases in crime, especially over the last 2. It's important to understand that, and this information, if percentages, statistics, whatever you want to call it, we actually went and pulled this stuff from like I like to really utilize the FBI crime database system, and it's actually gotten really good over the last few years at accumulating information. But just kind of as a overarching, description here, crime has risen dramatically in the last 2 years. So between
this is
2020
specific to the United States.
Yes, this is specific to the United States. I don't know what the worldwide information is.
Like Western culture in general.
Yeah. So this is specific to the U.S. But between 2020 and 2022, crime in general has risen dramatically by, they estimate, over 34%, which is a large amount to
huge.
jump. But that is all crime. So there's a lot of things that are categorized in that. Violent crime has jumped quite a bit. Surprisingly, at least in this last 2, murders have gone down, but violent crime has jumped quite a bit. So that's any crime that was, done, like a weapon was used, or like, domestic violence. Like, it includes any of that kind of stuff. It just obviously doesn't include. Actually, it still would include, I guess, murders, but because it's still a violent crime.
And that was in the past 2 years?
Yeah, that's just in the past 2 years.
Because I saw one that said murder rates nationwide were up, and I've heard this other places other than what I found yesterday, but is at its highest in like 25 years. So that's is up 30%, which it sounds like it's dipped, and I think I saw the same thing over the past couple of years. It dipped down. I think it was pretty high. Like kind of extra high during COVID.
It was at a record high.
Record high.
So it's dipped since the record high.
Okay.
So that's
so
an
which
important
it's still really high, right? What I was seeing was that in the past 25 years it was up like 30%, which is astronomical.
Yeah.
Really, it's astronomical. It's not 50%, but 30 is huge, pretty huge. And but and then it dropped down a little bit. I think it was really high during COVID, the peak of all of that stuff.
Shootings, like, it's sad to say, but it's commonplace now to just hear about a school shooting. Not even, I want to say not even 10 years ago. I
know
10 years ago they were happening, but it was like every time it happened, they were few and far between, and it was like national news coverage for weeks.
And everybody was
horrified. And now they just kind of get swept under the rug.
And I remember when the Virginia Tech shooting happened? How blown up that was.
Yep.
And I don't know if that was just because, I don't know. Yeah, it just seemed like that was national news. Like, it was a big deal. And not saying that, I don't know. I don't want to say that that's like a justification on like where we're at, but I'm just saying, like, I just remember it being a bigger deal than it seems like what they are now.
I think it is, though, because I think it happens so frequently. I think it's a few things. I think it happens so frequently that America's desensitized to it.
Yeah.
Even I see it in myself.
Yeah.
Like, there's another school shooting. That's kind of my reaction.
I hate it when that happens. Yeah.
And then I'll take a second and be like, no, that's terrible. And then I'll usually, if I'm thinking about it, I'll say a prayer for, I don't know who's involved, but I'll say a quick prayer for him.
Yeah.
But I've caught myself being callous to it.
Yeah.
Just like, well, it's those gun-free zones, or like even immediately, because we're so tailored to twist things towards a political agenda nowadays on either side.
Oh, absolutely, both.
We're so tailored to do that, which just further feeds into the division of our country and our communities. But shootings are up, and it's, I think, interestingly enough, I have another little note here about pornography. And pornography is, it's not a crime, obviously, but it is I believe it's a crime against your soul. It's pornography use and distribution and all that is at an all-time high. And it exploded during COVID. I think a lot of it had to do with the isolation. People were lonely and separated, and they leaned into pornography to satiate some of their loneliness and just overall, I think, depression and stuff. And you might wonder, like, well, why have you connected those? And I truly believe, and it's not just me just believing this. There's actually a lot of
I was going to say, there's a lot of proof that it does have like huge effects on mental,
Well,
because it dehumanizes it devalues.
It devalues, and it's kind of instant gratification, and instant gratification is rarely a good thing in general. But sexual indiscretions like that tend to make a person like frustrated and short-tempered.
Yeah.
And it steals your mental clarity, kind of makes you stupid for a little bit. And it's just, I mean, those are just some of the side effects of it.
Yeah.
Just in general. I heard a stat just recently. I want to say it was a guy that Sean Ryan show had on, and he said that there are so many child pornography videos just in the U.S. alone that there's like 1.5 per person in the United States.
Man.
And which, and there's 333, it's over 333 million people in, the population of the U.S. And that's huge. And that is a crime, and human trafficking is through the roof. We're seeing it all over. I mean, I saw that from 2000 to 2018, that suicide rates had increased by like 30%.
Yeah.
And that's really huge too. I mean, we're kind of losing it as a country, in a pretty big way. I don't know. I think it's pretty clear to say we're in like a national decline.
Yeah. Something that I, get kind of leaning more into what you're talking about there. Something that when I was looking at those FBI crime statistics, that was a shocking reality to me that I think I already kind of knew, but reading it was like kind of eye-opening, was that getting into sexual assault and rape and things like that, that you can toggle the percentages by offender and victim. And the offender was between ages 29 and 40.
Okay.
And the victim was between ages 1 and 10.
Whoa.
And that was
low?
the highest. That was the highest victim.
Whoa.
On the list.
Wow.
By a big margin. which is just that, and that right there, I think mirrors where we're at.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. Yeah. And that's something that, well, if you have a good, strong moral society, that's not allowed to exist.
That's right.
It's weeded out. It's whether that's through natural disciplines, take that for whatever that needs to be, or if it's through government, getting involved and putting people in prison, like policing systems and stuff like that. But I think a healthy society weeds that out and keeps that at bay.
Right.
Much better than a society that lets everyone have their own truth, cares so much. It's so inward. Everyone cares so much about self. Everything in our society is focused on me. How do I feel? How does this make me feel? What do I want to buy? Well, that doesn't work for me. Everything's about how you feel and who you are.
That's right.
You can be what you want to be. It's okay to be, you need to stop caring so much about what others think. It's all about how you think. And there's I think there's some good parts about some of those attributes to some degree. Like, for example, if you're being abused, it's not like, well, I need to care, I need to care about others and I need to care about that person's needs. It's like, no, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But people have just overcorrected because it's complete selfishness.
Well, it's self-gratification.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I find that's really kind of odd about that, this society where we promote self-gratification is, since when was self-sacrifice a bad thing? And since when was selfishness a building block of a good and strong society? Like all the old movies and all that we love and admire about vets like you guys is the willingness to selflessly lay down your life for someone else. And it is 100% the opposite. I mean, as a really good example, I wear a bracelet with a friend of mine on it who died back in 2007 in Baghdad. And that dude, he feared God. He was a captain of his special operations unit. And he's got like, I don't know what the count is up to now, but he's got like probably 18 or 20 kids named after him.
Wow.
One of them being one of my sons. It's like someone who has a code of honor that you live by, which has to be personal. I mean, it's great if you're part of a unit and you've got integrity within the unit and stuff.
Yeah.
But it was a personal thing for him.
Right.
And it's that self-sacrifice and serving of other people. I mean, one of the things that he told his dad soon before he died was that he's like, Dad, he said, we're doing a lot of good stuff over here. Some of the stuff they were doing was humanitarian, along with some other things. It was kind of the opposite of that when it came to terrorist organizations and stuff. But he was like, we're accomplishing a lot of good things here.
Yeah.
And my whole point in bringing him up is that self-sacrifice is what people long to see in other people, serving of others. But yet the culture tells us that the way to go these days is to completely serve yourself and gratify every desire and slake every lust, and it's part of what is our downfall.
Yeah.
Is that we're catering to that, the worship of self. And I'm not saying as opposed to the worship of others, but to the service of others, right?
Yeah.
Our politicians aren't public servants. They're about as self-serving on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, yeah.
They're about as self-serving as you can get.
Yep. I agree. I think the public servant mentality, especially from a political point of view, is a thing of the past.
Yeah.
And that's why, I mean, you look at the types of people that are being attracted to that type of work now. They are not people that personify service.
Right.
they're
not others minded.
No, it's personal gain. And I don't want to make a generalization. There are good good representatives and
yes,
some good politicians out there. And we've been fortunate enough to work with some.
Yeah, that's right.
We actually, just the other day met with a local politician who's, I believe, to truly be serving our community.
He's a public servant.
He is. And
yeah.
And I think there's good ones out there, but they're few and far between.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. So
can I mention something too, just real quick?
Yeah.
Talking about all of the like sexual improprieties and stuff, like molestation and that sort of thing. Pretty closely tied. I mean, we were created to be. I mean, we're sexual beings, right? Like that's part of who we are.
Yeah.
In general, along with that, I just wanted to mention too. Marriage is down at a super all-time low. I don't have numbers for this, so don't quote me. But people, at least from what I've heard, people are waiting to get married till they're into their 30s, right? I mean, in a pretty big way. I made it. I was 26. My wife was 19. But
I was 19.
Were you?
Yeah, my wife was 18. We got married super young.
That's awesome.
And everyone told us we'd fail.
Yeah.
And we're happily married. She's my favorite person in the world, and we've been married for 13 years.
That's awesome.
So,
a lady told my wife that a lady with a failed marriage. What's that?
I said in your face.
In your face. A lady told my wife that she was kind of advised her against getting married.
Yeah.
At the age she was at, but
isn't that weird?
Yeah.
Anyways, I didn't mean to derail you. Sorry.
No, totally fine. What's interesting is so U.S. population in 1960 was 179 million. It's like 175 to 179 million people. That was with 40 million married couples, okay, out of 179 million. In 2022, the U.S. population it's over 333 million people with 61 million married couples, which that doesn't sound too bad. Except that 40 to 50% of married couples divorce.
Yeah.
In this country. And that makes us the 6th highest in the world for divorce rates. And we shouldn't be patting ourselves on the back that we have 5 other countries ahead of us. But so it's like it's like we don't know how to be faithful anymore.
Yeah.
Right? Like we don't know how to be faithful anymore. And then I'm just going to say something because I've shown up on the podcast a few times, but our population would be way higher if we didn't kill so many of our kids in the womb.
Yep.
And that's a super controversial topic. And
it shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be. People are, yeah.
That's one of the big and not. I mean, well, I think that's 100% something that we need to lean into.
Well, there would have been a couple more numbers. There would have been 712,800 babies between Roe versus Wade and now.
Yeah.
That we have killed that would have added to the population in our country. And over half the states currently in the United States, over half of the states have a higher death rate now in this country than birth rate. It's just over half. So we're a declining population. Almost half of us don't know how to stay married. We wait way too long to get married, in my opinion, and have kids. And that's even some of the people in my family too.
What did you say? You said till late 30s is what most people are
into their 30s.
Into their 30s. Okay,
so somewhere in their 30s,
have kids.
They can
late
still
30s,
have kids.
Yeah, it starts getting
especially for a woman.
Yeah.
And then crime is like at a high, kind of an all-time high. We need to figure out what the problem is, right?
Yeah.
We know there's a problem. And I just throw these numbers out just because it's just to paint a little bit clearer picture, right? For the problem that we all know. If you're listening to this podcast, like you said, Jacob, there's a reason you're listening to this podcast. And if you're listening to it, you know that there's an issue, right? I think all of us are tingling a little bit these days.
Yeah.
With the goings on in our country and the world, and we see what's going on.
Yep. Yeah, I want to make a quick before we kind of move on here. I just want to make a couple statements about abortion, because I've seen a lot in this community, and when I say community, I mean the kind of whatever you want to call it, gun culture 3.0, 4.0, or like the readiness community or the gun community, however you view it. I see a lot in there, a lot of people that are very how do I word this? There's a lot of libertarian views, which I think in many ways I can be libertarian, and I think it's, a lot of people are more centrist now than ever, even though that's a group that is ultimately the most quiet, it seems to be. Yeah. Kind of mind their own business, do their own thing. And so I see the side, I can see how people may get caught up in, and I use caught up specifically, in the, government shouldn't be involved in this, government shouldn't be involved in that, we can't let government, do this and this and this. And yeah, I think there's a real problem with government overreach. I think hiding behind the banner of government overreach when it comes to the murder of babies is not acceptable. And I think if you're caught up in that, you need to take a hard look at it. And if you're feeling some kind of rage because of what I just said, then you have an emotional problem with this issue. And I think it's important to step outside of yourself for a second and really look at it. There's
yeah, because like ultimately that same argument is we can turn it around and be like, so do you want murderers not to go to jail over it, or like,
yeah,
because it's the same concept. That's governed, like that's a crime that's policed by the government. Those laws are put into place by the government.
They're supposed to police.
So if you're going to sit here and say, well, that's government overreach, well, so is everything that police do to stop people from doing crimes. And at that point,
yeah.
Murder's murder, regardless of how you feel about it.
Yes,
that's right.
And it is a separate life with its own DNA. It's literally procreation. It's how babies are. It's how we get humans. You have sex, and a sperm attaches to an egg, and a baby's made. And I don't care, you have all this stuff now about it's a bunch of cells, it's a fetus, it's not a baby, it's a fetus. It's just ridiculous. And everyone knows it. That's the thing.
They
too.
do. And you exactly what I was
and every
thinking.
time I've had this conversation with people, it's, well, what about women that are raped? Well, and this is not a popular opinion, but it's still a life.
That's right.
A wrong doesn't, in my opinion, doesn't
Two
warrant
wrongs doesn't
another
make a
wrong.
right.
Exactly. I served with a guy in the military who was a child of rape. And we had this long conversation about abortion in the barracks. And he was really quiet the whole time. No one knew. And then all these guys were like, yeah, but, and they started bringing up the rape argument. And I was kind of fighting against that. And he just all of a sudden popped up and said, I don't tell this to too many people, but I'm glad my mom didn't abort the baby when she was raped. And everyone got super quiet and looked at him. And he said, because I wouldn't be here sitting here having this conversation with you guys right now.
And that's powerful.
And we all shut our mouths and just looked at him. And I would never forget that. And that's the only time he brought that up. But that was such a powerful moment. And it was a realization of this is such a serious issue. And it's gone on for too long in our society. And I hope one day that we look back at this, our younger generations look back and go, why was that done for so long? It's a problem.
You know,
I think it is evil at its core because it's celebrated and it's pushed and it's treated as a modern medical procedure.
Yeah.
Now, I know it gets
even further into that because you start looking at the amount of parts being sold and it gets way weirder.
You know, that whole thing with rape and abortion, or rape and then aborting the child afterward, it reminds me of a really common picture that I see on social media often, and it's the picture of the phoenix rising out of the ashes. Mm-hmm. And we love that because it's something that is reborn out of pain and sorrow and destruction. And yet, the very fact that a woman gets raped, and it's obviously we're not downplaying the rape.
No, it's terrible.
That's a horrible crime.
That person should be beheaded for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it's and at least in Alaska, it's one of the few crimes that you're fully allowed to kill someone over. So if you come up on a scene, you can use lethal force right there. It doesn't have to be in your home. It doesn't have to be anything.
And that's how it should be.
Legitimately execute that person for doing that.
I'm glad that's the law because that's probably the actions I would take.
Yeah. Well, and so that being the case, it's clear our stance on rape. Women are not meant to be used.
No.
Right? They're a beautiful creature made in the image of God, which, we can go off on that about how men are taking over women's sports and women's beauty contests and all that kind of crap.
Yeah.
Women are perfect the way that they are and should not be taken advantage of. That being said, the longer I live, and I've got 4 kids, 2 boys and 2 girls, and the longer I live and the longer I see the crap and the garbage in this country and the world, and the more it weighs on me, the more I see the beauty in new life. I've got all kinds of nieces and nephews now. A bunch of my brothers and sisters have gotten married in recent years, and they're having kids like crazy. And it's great, and I love it. My nephews came over the other day, and there's something so beautiful and pure and perfect. Now, they're not absolutely perfect, right? Like, we're born in sin. I mean, inherited from Adam. So, but the point being is they're these beautiful, perfect little creatures, these little humans.
Yeah.
And the people always say the argument that's always made for abortion in the case of rape is why punish the woman with giving her a child? It's like, why punish the child by taking that little person's life for a sinful action done by the father that actually brought the child into the world? Yeah. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's not a very complicated issue, but the basic premise that life is beautiful and life is given by God, and that there is beauty that comes out of the ashes, if you would.
Yeah.
And life that comes from something that in itself is very destructive and hurtful.
Yeah.
There is something beautiful that can come out of that. And yeah, 2 wrongs don't make a right. Like you said, Stephen, it's not fixing a problem. It's accelerating the problem. It's making the problem worse by killing the child.
Yeah. And if you have a different opinion than that, then I'm not condemning you, but I am asking that you deeply consider it, because I've also found that it's very common that people that have that point of view don't have kids.
Yeah.
I think that changes a lot when you have kids. But that shouldn't, I'm not saying that should be what informs your decision.
Yeah.
But it's just there's the value of a human life is so important, and that's the overarching problem, is that our morality is degraded to a point where we don't actually value human life. That's why we can look at all these statistics. Violent crime, people don't care. Yeah, I'll stab the crap out of somebody so I can take their car. I'm angry. I'm going to shoot up my school. I'm being pumped with all these antidepressants, so I'm going to kill my parents and steal their guns and go shoot up this school or whatever. Pornography is just rampant. It's so rampant that it's like, it's nasty. I mean, the amount of stuff that's in there nowadays that's being used.
And pornography is actually, and I'm not talking about even child pornography, but pornography is a lot of times the gateway to a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. It's a slippery slope.
Yep.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, my parents, there was 9 of us kids, actually 10. I had a little sister who passed away after birth. And I'm not Mormon and I'm not Catholic. Everybody always asks or thinks, are you Mormon? Are you Catholic? No. No, I don't have anything against Mormons and Catholics. I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah.
But so growing up, we took this trip. There was 9 of us kids, and we took this trip down to Washington, D.C., Fairfax, Virginia area, and visited my dad's cousin down there. And she took us around to see the sights. And one of the places we visited was the Lincoln Memorial. Have you guys been there?
Dude, I've never been to Washington, D.C.
Yep.
I want to go really bad.
Yeah, you should if you get a chance.
I've been there.
You been to the Lincoln Memorial?
Yep.
He's huge. Lincoln is huge.
Pretty massive.
He's white marble. I'm sure everybody's seen pictures of him at least. And he's sitting in there on this throne, essentially.
Yeah.
And the throne's kind of modeled after like the throne Caesar would sit on. There's all these like Roman, accents or whatever. And I was thinking around the time that Roe versus Wade got overturned, how to explain my position to people who may not agree with me. And I feel like this kind of best sums it up. If you were to go to Washington, D.C., take some cans of black spray paint and a sledgehammer and paint Lincoln, maybe give him a mustache, basically just degrade him. Take a sledgehammer, knock his head off. You would have a reaction from people on both sides of the aisle like you've not seen before. The reason is that we're a country that's very sensitive about racism in general. We say that we're very sensitive about it, right? You've got people on the left who say they're against racism. You got people on the right who say they're against racism. Everybody kind of wants to claim Lincoln as their president. Now, the question I have is, why is it such a big deal to degrade and smash the statue of Lincoln? It's not Lincoln. It's marble. It's a chunk of marble that's carved to look like Lincoln. So what's the big deal? Well, the big deal with defacing and smashing the statue, the marble statue of Lincoln, is that it stands for what Lincoln stands for and stood for. It embodies the principles that he stood on. And so, is it wrong to smash the statue? In principle, yes, it's very wrong. It's a slap in the face of Lincoln, and a slap in the face of our country, if you would, to both people on both sides. In the same way, from the Christian perspective, to destroy a human life is to slap the creator of the universe in the face. It's to deface the one who made you, because we're told in Scripture that man and woman, they are created in the image of God. They're not God, but they're made in His image and likeness. We reason, we love, we have emotion. All these things are given to us by God, and so the reason that we value life, not just life outside the womb, but life in the womb, not the potential for life, but the fact that it actually is life in the womb, is because it's an affront to the one whose image we bear. right? And this is the problem that I have with, I guess we don't want to get too political here, but the problem that we have with some of this woke ideology, which is they claim that they have the moral high ground, and yet they elevate certain ethnicities and genders above others instead of saying they're all equal.
Right.
Right. And the right mentality is to say all people, regardless of your skin color, whether you're a man or a woman, regardless of whether you're in the womb or outside the womb, the moral standard is the same for you. You're equal. You're created in the image of God, and it's the most beautiful thing. It's actually kind of the foundation that our country was founded on. And I know there's a lot of rebuttal to that. Like I had somebody just the other night who said, we were at a meeting, and this individual was talking to me and another friend afterwards, and said, who was it that mentioned the Constitution as being a document that says everyone is equal, that made everybody equal? She said, slaves were only like 3/4 of a person, or considered 3/4 of a person. I said, yeah, but the foundation, we worked through this, and I don't know if we were the first country, or at least we were the first, or at least a close second, to abolish slavery. It was our goal that every man, woman, and child would be considered equal. Now, you can write a document, and that doesn't change the culture, but the goal was there, right?
Yep.
The principles, the foundational principles that all people are created equal and given certain unalienable rights, not by government, but by God.
Yeah, because at the time, that was a global trade standard.
Absolutely.
Slavery still exists to this day in many parts of the world.
Yes.
People fail to...
And that's another thing. Like we had a lot of Europeanisms, still as a country when that like early on,
growing pains. Yep.
So
I like something that Charlie Kirk says, which is everyone has one thing in common, that we were all born into a world in which we didn't create.
Oh yeah.
Our responsibility at that point is what we do with the time that we're given, right?
Yep.
So the founders were born into a world of slavery, which was a big moral issue. But it was, and some of them owned slaves. Quite a few of them owned slaves. But it's, what did they do with it, right? So I think that's our responsibility today, is what do we do with the time that we've got?
Well, and I think it's a perfect time to jump right into, how America was founded and the Constitution. It's such an important document in the founding of our nation. And America, a lot of people refer to it as an experiment. You'll hear that a lot. It was a social experiment, and it kind of is, because it was the first of its kind. It's actually, I'm big into history. That was like probably my favorite subject in school, and I've always been interested by historical relevance and things that have happened in the past. And American history is very, there's a lot of darkness in American history, obviously, but there's a lot of really cool things that has happened.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
This, and I'm the first person to tell you that America's not perfect. But it's a pretty awesome formation of a country, and the reasons why it was formed, I think, are even better, because it was basically a group of people that decided enough was enough. They were tired of the tyranny, they were tired of the oppression, and one of the biggest parts of that was religious oppression. So being forced into a certain religion, not having religious freedom. There's a lot of history about the state of the church at that point in England and so on and so forth, parts of Europe that played a big role of that. But I think it's really important to understand, and there may be opinions on this, but it's not really refutable. This is just part of our history. But America was founded on biblical principles.
That's right.
And I think that's really important to understand, because when we start looking at things like morality, a question that comes up a lot is like, well, who's morality? I've been asked that a lot. Like, what does that mean?
Who is it?
Well,
it's a man.
No, hi, I'm morality. No.
Who's morality?
But, like what religion's morality is a question I've been asked a lot.
Yeah.
Like, is it the Quran's morality? Is it the Bible's morality? And it's like, well, specifically for American history, it was biblical morality.
Interesting. If I could just interject really quick.
Absolutely.
Interesting with saying biblical morality. It was absolutely. But it's interesting in the Declaration of Independence. It doesn't mention, I'm not saying it doesn't mention, there's not mention biblical principles, but I think based on the freedom of religion for all religions, how it's stated in the Declaration of Independence is that they are appealing to the laws of nature and nature's God.
Yep.
So who's God or which religion? Let's go really basic. Let's say the creator of the universe and of everything and everyone. Like, I think that's part of the reason for their mentioning that.
Yeah.
But absolutely, it was founded on biblical principles. Those dudes at the beginning were very much, I think, followers of Scripture.
Yeah.
At least had a keen understanding of it.
Right. And a lot of people get confused here and assume that means that, make the false assumption that that's the religion you must follow and that's how it was written. No, it was written specifically that there would be freedom of religion.
For everyone, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the reason that, you have some of these, like you mentioned, how there's not word for word biblical principles laid out in the Constitution, but that was an assumed behavior,
Yes.
because that was the behavior of the time. That was part of the culture. That was, men were doing their best to follow the Scriptures and live their lives in a biblical manner. That was part of the common culture.
That's
was
right.
Common sense at the time was to live through decency and follow some of those things. So,
And it was predicated on the basic premise. All of our the foundation of this country was built on the premise that all men, like I mentioned earlier, all men are created equal. Mm-hmm. That's men, women, and children, and that everyone is created in the image of God and therefore has value. Right? That's the very reason that that we have some of the problems today, because you're allowed to do almost whatever you want at this point, which kind of leads to what some of the founders said.
Yeah, like I got this quote by John Adams.
Yeah,
our Constitution
absolutely.
was made only for moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. So basically
100%.
saying, if you don't have morals to be bound by, with the way our Constitution's written, it could be a free-for-all in a weird way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's what we're experiencing to some extent now.
Yeah.
Self-governance doesn't work if you don't govern yourself, right?
Yeah.
It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
I mean, the state governs, right? But the founders recognized that this Constitution would only work if people were interested in self-control and self-governing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think, that's again why there is those biblical principles and the way that they lived their lives was kind of centered around this idea. Like it was needed, just like that quote that you just read.
Yeah.
Did you say it was John Adams?
Yeah, it was John Adams. He's had a few like that. Like he had another one that was human passions unbridled by morality and religion would break the strongest chords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net. Well, I kind of butchered that at the end, but that's all right.
As a whale goes through a net?
Yeah, as a whale goes through a net.
Man.
Yeah.
That sounds like he's talking about today.
Right now. Yeah.
And the reason we bring this up is because I think this is, we reference it a lot, and this whole community references it a lot, the whole modern Minuteman. And, what was a Minuteman? Well, it was men of the time who wanted to protect what they had, and they chose to be disciplined and trained in matters of fighting and matters of war to react at a moment's notice. And literally within a minute. That was why they were called the Minuteman, is be ready within a minute's notice to stand with and destroy the enemy. And the enemy was anyone who challenged their freedom and challenged their right to live religiously, freely, and have a family and provide for that family.
That's right.
And it was the common lifestyle at the time was to homestead and have a family and raise that family and do so freely.
Yeah.
And freely is where I think a lot of people take it too far, because it wasn't just like we just said, it wasn't just a free for all, because they were guided by those moral principles that were laid out to them in scriptures.
Yep.
And I think that distinction is you just have to make that distinction.
Yeah.
Regardless of your beliefs. Now, if you're not, well, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I guess what I'm trying to say is these things are true regardless of what you believe today. These things are what makes up the structure of America.
Yeah.
So regardless of who you believe in or what you believe in today, it doesn't change the way this country was founded and the direction it was put, the direction it was set out on by its founders.
Yeah.
So, also, you were talking about destroying the enemy, and Zeke, you were just talking about, you can't, it's incorrect to murder anything with the image of God. Everyone's made in God's image and all that stuff. And to kind of counter that, because I'm sure people who don't necessarily agree with what we're saying or is looking for anything to kind of like, oh, well, you just said that you can't do that, I'm going to pull up a Bible verse to read for you. Romans 13:4. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for the rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servant, agents of wrath, to bring punishment to the wrongdoer. So basically, God's put people in positions, whether through our government law, that's a good verse for, anyone that says, oh yeah, I don't know how you can be a Christian, go be a soldier, because you had you had to go take people's lives. I feel like that's a good verse to be like, well, here you go. This is how it works.
Government is God's institution.
Yes.
There's bad governments and there's good governments, but the institution itself
is always God's.
Is God's institution.
Yes. So, idea. And I think that applies to the Minuteman as well.
Yeah.
I think that's that's a group of individuals that God has put heavy on their hearts to take up that role.
Yeah.
And it's still a institution that he, in a way, has control over.
That's right.
So, I think that is kind of, it's different. Like it's the same argument as if someone's going to rape a woman. Our law, even man's law, allows us, at least in the state of Alaska, to go up and take that person's life in that act, and you're going to be completely cleared of it. Yeah. But I agree that I think God would agree with that as well.
Yep, absolutely.
So I just wanted to bring that up so no one's like, well, you guys are kind of contradicting yourselves,
Right.
It's like, well, you put your, I don't know.
Well, honestly, I think if anything, it's more more of an indication that the Bible's a pretty amazing book, and I think more people need to read it and need to be open to it. And I've really relied on it in hard times, and it's a daily discipline for me, or at least I try to make it a daily discipline. Sometimes I fall short,
dude. So when I worked on the slope, this has to do with what you're talking about. When I worked on the slope, so he's just gonna go off in left field, right?
No.
I had this little oil field Bible.
Yeah,
like I don't know who makes them. The oil field press, who knows?
Oh, it's actually like a oil field Bible.
Oil field Bible.
Huh.
Yeah,
okay.
It's got like a picture of a rig on the front, and it's kind of cool. I think it's an NIV or something, New International Version.
Cool. Yeah,
and I would bring it out with me. This is kind of a story for those people that aren't maybe very religious or whatever, right? Anyway, one day I had it out there. I worked slickline, so you got a tool trailer, and then you've got the unit that sits in front of the well, and it's got a little cab on it, and the operator runs the tools from the unit down into the well and services the well. Anyway, we were kind of me and the lead hand. I was a third hand. Me and the lead hand and the operator were sitting in the unit. In the operator's unit, and I had that little Bible in there, and we were just sitting there talking about whatever. And over the next few days, my operator would kind of pick it up and read it a little bit. And he was kind of like a good old boy, religious guy. Like, he didn't take it real serious, but it was kind of important to him. Morals were important to him and stuff. And one day we're talking, and he picks it up and he says, "Dude, I was reading some of this. There's some crazy stuff in here." He's like, I said, "Yeah, you just thought it was a book about like do's and don'ts and rules and stuff, like super religious type stuff." He's like, "Oh, there's like rape and murder and incest," and I'm like, "It's all in there. Like, talk about some crazy stuff, some crazy accounts."
Yeah.
And I tell that because I want to encourage those people that maybe don't read the Bible to kind of interest them in it. Maybe kind of a weird way to interest people. Saying there's some raunchy stories in there. My point in mentioning that is that it's not just a book full of do's and don'ts. It's a book about very unrighteous, wicked people who became righteous, or righteous people who fell flat on their face and had to ask God for repentance. They had to repent before God and ask him for forgiveness. It's about people who did righteous things, trusting in God. It's about the rise and fall of civilizations. It's about God's interactions with man's interactions with each other. You got the book of Proverbs. I'm reading through it with my kids, and it is just solid wisdom for how to live and how to interact with people.
Yep.
Like one thing that stuck in my mind at the beginning of this podcast is when we're talking about like kind of how to get into this subject. It's like we live in a culture that is just, we're just going sideways right now. And what is really interesting that Proverbs says is people within the church would know this right off. It's like the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And at another place it says fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. But what's really funny, the writer of Proverbs at one point says, if you want wisdom, seek wisdom. The beginning of wisdom is seek wisdom, which is really key. Because if you're not looking for it, you're not going to find it. It's kind of the same adage that Jesus says, seek and you'll find, right? So like all of this kind of begins with asking the question, like, why are we where we're at now? how do we get out of it, and kind of what's foundational?
Yeah.
Like, what is the foundation? You know, it's like, you want wisdom, seek wisdom. But it's interesting. One thing that's really interesting too is the United States of America was founded on biblical principles, and you know, a sense of morality and ethics. But from some of the looking we've done, there's definitely other countries that are that followed kind of that same path, as far as like started out strong morally with a sense of, I guess you might say, religiosity, and then kind of had that same moral decline.
Yeah.
And there's quite a few different cultures.
Yeah, absolutely.
That took that same path.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I really like what you said about, if you're not looking for wisdom, like if you're not seeking wisdom, then you're definitely not going to find it. Like and that's a mindset thing.
Yeah.
And I think the same goes for what we're talking about today. If you're trying to figure out, well, what is the answer? What is the source of morality? And I think it's the Bible. I think that's, ultimately, I think it's Jesus Christ. You know, but I think the Bible is, you know, it's I think it is actually the oldest document in human history. And that's, I believe that stood the test of time, and, you know, and no one's been able to really, or no one's actually really ever refuted that, I don't believe. It was used, you know, to help found America. But I think, you know, I think a lot of people who try to disprove or kind of discredit, I should say, the Bible, I see it a lot. They cherry pick random references and random verses, and say, well, if you believe the Bible, then the Bible says this. And it's really funny, because people that actually study the Bible are immediately like, you know, thanks for taking something completely out of context. That was, you know, that was this guy talking to this guy, and actually before that he said, this is bad, you're doing this, and then yet you took this part where he described what he was doing was evil, and then said the Bible says this, so you must be okay with this. That stuff happens all the time.
It happens in daily life, in media and stuff. You see it cherry picked, then you find out the truth, right?
Yep.
But yeah,
context is so important.
It is,
and you're only going to get the context if you study the source material.
Yeah.
And I think if you're in a life where you're trying to dive into these issues and understand them further, I can't think of a better place to guide you to than the Bible.
Did you know that there is more evidence that for the Bible's accuracy than there is for the writings of William Shakespeare?
I did not know that.
Yeah.
But I believe it.
That is predicated on, so a text's accuracy is predicated on the number of manuscripts, of ancient manuscripts that have been collected over time, and how well they agree with each other. And there are far more manuscripts that have been gathered over a long period of time, that have come from a ton of different sources. There are far more for the Bible, for the writings of Scripture, than there are for William Shakespeare. And yet, what's interesting is, you know, people want to discount the Bible, and yet we don't discount the writings of William Shakespeare.
Right.
You know, we use his plays and all kinds of stuff. So I just throw that out there, because there's been a whole lot of studying, and like I have my grandpa and my cousin were both doctors of theology and traveled to Israel a bunch of times and studied the Dead Sea Scrolls and stuff like that. And that kind of stuff is pretty foundational, because you can't just believe something. You don't want to just believe something blindly without actually understanding its roots and knowing, like, it goes back to seeking wisdom, right? It's like knowing why do you believe what you believe? What is the basis? What is the basis for my belief system? So anyway, just a little tidbit out there for the Bible and its accuracy.
For sure. And you can find examples like that time and time again,
Yeah.
Because it's a true document. And
that's right.
I think it goes beyond us. It's obviously it's the Word of God.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. Well, let's branch off of that a little bit. And actually, you mentioned historical examples a second ago. You made mention to some that have happened, and there definitely have been some. And I think now would be a good opportunity to take a look at it. I think always taking a look back at history is important. Obviously the quote where those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it, which is not the quote exactly. I paraphrased it.
That's how people do paraphrase that one, I think.
Yeah. But I think it's very true, and we've already seen proof of that several times in history. And it's amazing how many civilizations have really rose into just global power, and have sunk into a figment of history, an ancient past.
A lot of these don't even really exist anymore.
Just purely through morality.
Yeah.
And so, I think we should get into some of that.
Yeah, so going all the way back to 1800 BC, dude. We're going way back. The Hittites, man.
The way back.
The Hittites. So their ruling was from 1800 to 1100 BC. And
that's 700 years, right? Yeah. 700 years.
Yeah, it's a pretty good chunk there. But they same thing, they what you're going to see on all these is going to be, they had some sort of moral backing. A lot of this wasn't Christianity, but it was some sort of religion that they did follow, which allowed them to gain power in the first place.
Yeah.
And then with power, they kind of squander it away, whether that's through wealth and just trying to be, I don't know, basically just gluttonous and just ruining it with whatever they want to do, with whatever desire they have. Are we getting into like individual, or do you want me to just kind of...
What do you mean?
Like, do you want me to like break it down like individually, like what each...
Yeah, let's just give some examples. I think there's because I think the important thing, let's say this really quick. You hear a lot of people say, "Oh yeah, Rome," like that. That's the one that a lot of people know about.
Yeah,
but this is not just just isolated to the Roman history, which Rome fell a couple times.
Yeah,
but it's amazing. It's pretty much any major civilization that's ever existed has fallen to this,
and there's
which is, I mean, take that in.
Yeah.
It's actually incredible.
Why did it have? And I think the questions are, how did they rise?
Yep.
And how did they fall? And what's interesting, the difference is actually the length of time that they existed. And and their fall, like the length of their power and prosperity, was kind of predicated on how quickly they gave into like moral decline, right?
Yeah. So what ended up kind of taking out the Hittites was basically they started. I mean, a lot of these you're going to be like, man, that's some of the things America's doing now. But they basically started giving tax breaks to people with power, and then also people who are influential people within so they were basically trying to they made people they liked very wealthy, or people that were in power very wealthy, and then which in result made people who were not very poor. And what ended up basically happening is there was revolt among the citizens, and it basically started a war which ended up basically destroying their country, or their power, I guess. But I mean, they don't exist now, so they basically destroyed them as a group altogether.
Civil wars and
the interesting thing about the Hittites, from what I was kind of reading, is that that's one of the ones that they actually they rose to power through the manufacturing of like tools, like iron tools. So it's like the Iron Age. So Zeke, you better be careful. But they didn't have as much of a religion-based set of morals.
Okay.
Which I think set them up for failure right out the gate. And I think that's what made way for a lot of this like drastic, leaning towards these influential citizens and like you're talking about with the tax breaks and stuff. And then just natural from there was that degradation or that decline of morality, because there wasn't really a set morality to begin with. Notice
it's really interesting though that their leadership kind of took on the aura or kind of semblance of a god, and that's never a good thing either, right? Like not only just to have class warfare, which you see pretty obviously in this country. You got the elites and you've got the middle and lower class, but when your leadership starts having such a high-minded view of themselves, that's always really dangerous for a culture.
It's interesting too about kind of going into like the battle of the classes and stuff. It's actually cool to see that the citizens of the Hittites revolted against. It says that they revolted against a corrupt and immoral leadership.
Interesting.
And that was, I don't know, that's just interesting. But regardless, I think it's interesting from several fronts. It's cool that they stood up against that, but that society still fell and is now non-existent.
Yeah, it ultimately was the doom of the country, or their society, I guess.
They self-destructed.
Yep. Which is why, and it's something I want to touch on later, but I think it's why chasing anarchy or pursuing, everything needs to be wiped clean, we need to start fresh, it's rarely in history has that worked. Rarely.
Yeah, and actually you'll see that a lot. A lot of these that we're going to cover actually do. Ultimately, that's the defeat, the falling. Like the straw that broke the camel's back is ultimately the civilization having an uprising, and then there's a civil war basically, and that's actually seen quite a bit. But the next one I wanted to hit on was the Babylonian Empire. So this is from 1600 to 500 BC. They very much like the Hittites. They kind of fell to greed. I'd say greed and selfishness. Selfishness. Was that right? Am I saying that?
Selfishness, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Somehow that was kicking my butt.
I hate it when that happens.
It's always funny when you say a word and you're like, did I just make that up? But it's like the actual word,
Yeah.
Anyways.
But that's ultimately what was the doom for them as well. I mean, they obviously they made kind of like what you were saying, almost having godlike structures, and they were really like putting gold and just expensive metals and stuff like that they were trying to decorate everything with, and almost having a gaudy look to what they were building.
It was kind of unchecked consumerism.
Yeah.
It was like extravagant
we don't
lifestyles,
have that problem.
All about imagery and what you can portray, and it's kind of crazy.
That is crazy.
I mean, they're the ones who made the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which is one of the 7 wonders of the world.
Yeah.
Which, interesting fact, says it takes 8,200 gallons per day to maintain that.
That's amazing.
Wow.
Which is like so much water. And I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, didn't they have some drought issues?
It's
which is hysterical in a way.
Yeah, like it sounds like water was pretty scarce.
Yeah, well, no wonder.
It was after they watered the plants.
Yeah, holy smokes.
Well, the funny thing is they tried to maintain that throughout the drought, throughout their water shortages.
Well, that's because it was important.
Yeah. So that was their big trend, was completely unnecessary, just wealth and decoration and just extravagant lifestyle, squandering resources.
Yeah.
Like, it's just so, I'm laughing because it just reminds me so much of our society right now.
Yeah, we're in it. We're doing it right now. And well, not like right now, not like right now, but the country is.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, and then ultimately the same situation as the Hittites. They ended up, ending in civil disarrest and started basically they just imploded upon themselves, pretty much. I mean, yeah.
Old Nebuchadnezzar. He's
old Nebby.
He's old Neb. My dad refers to him as Neb. He's there's the biblical account of him, and the reason that he gets kicked out for a while from being king, like for 7 years, is because God tells him, he's like, change your ways. You're too high and lifted up about yourself, and if you don't change, you're gonna get kicked out and be like an animal for 7 years.
Yeah.
And he doesn't change his ways. He thinks too highly of himself, and once again, puts himself in the place of God and in his own mind, and he thinks he's accumulated all this wealth and stuff by his own might and wisdom, and it happens to him, but it's that same thing as with the Hittites, in which it's super dangerous when a civilization has leadership that lifts themselves up and thinks way too highly of themselves.
It's interesting. It just kind of reminded me of that. I was talking to our brother David.
Okay.
Who is he's actually studying to become a pastor right now. He's going through getting his degree in ministry and stuff like that. And we were talking about how he became he thought he was basically thought he was like cattle for 7 years.
Yeah,
and he went out and ate grass, and
hair grew out and his nails got long.
But he still was like a human, but he thought he was a cow, basically.
Yeah.
And
so
that's a
mind changed.
That's a real condition. It's a real psychological disorder.
Really?
That has actual recorded incidents that has happened in
throughout
human
history.
It's called bonethropy.
Whoa.
And it's a psychological disorder in which a human believes themselves to be a bovine. So
whoa.
He sent me an article about that, and I just found it very interesting.
So
and
this is different from furries.
No, this is it's an actual psychological disorder.
You know what I'm referring to, right?
It's not like what we see now, where it's like, I'm a wolf,
as
it's like this
unicorn.
A person will go live in the field. It's like they'll shut off from their.
Yeah, they said that. What was it? He said the fingernails and stuff were.
Yeah.
Was it that's what it was?
Yep.
It's like almost perfectly.
Like that happens too?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, which is part of just being unkempt,
Yeah.
But anyways, just very interesting. Kind of a side note.
That is
there.
very interesting. Thanks for that.
Thanks for that. I really appreciate
therapy. But David's probably going to listen to this podcast and wish I said so much more about that. We talked about it for a long time, but anyways, so back to Babylon.
Well, I mean, that's pretty much all I got on Babylon. I mean, a lot of these are kind of the same because they're so old. There's not a lot of perfect documentation. Like once we get to Rome, there's way more because there's much more accounts for what the heck was going on there.
Egypt.
The next one is Egyptian civilization.
The Prince of Egypt.
Yeah,
this is 3100 to 500 BC.
Watched just recently.
So a lot of the same stuff. I mean, greed. It's pretty much same story, different
Pharaohs
people.
Thought they were God.
Yeah, they thought they were gods. This is where we first start seeing murdering of children. Like they
Okay.
that was like very common in their culture. Yeah, it's pretty weird. Lots of cults.
Mm-hmm.
It was just wickedness, I guess, all the way around.
Yeah.
And ultimately they just became, I think they just kind of self-imploded as well. I mean, like pretty much all these things are going to do. They became very weak, and here it says Alexander the Great was able to evade Egypt in 332 BC and take control. He restored order with martial law, and I think he did it very easily from like all the historical documents of it. So it was like they went from a powerhouse to just weak.
Well, if you don't know, if you have no moral standard that you live by, not that there isn't one, but if you have none that you're living by and you can't govern yourself, and men need to be governed, it makes sense that some kind of authoritarian would come in. They always say power loves a vacuum, but it's like it only makes sense that some power is going to come in and just take over. And I mean, I guess you could revolt against it, but if you've got no moral basis, then there's no way you can't govern yourself, essentially.
Yeah.
If you have no moral standard that you're living by.
Mm-hmm. Man. Yep.
Crazy.
Yeah. There's a thing in here that sticks out to me. That's I find interesting, where it says that citizens became complacent by their newfound interest in non-critical trades such as ebony, myrrh, frankincense, and gold. I find that pretty interesting in there. It's, I think there's so much distraction nowadays.
Yeah.
And it's non-essential. It's things that don't actually have any bearing on you or your life or your family's life or anything. There's so much material distraction. So
yeah,
I the way that's written, that they became complacent, I just like that, because I think that's very accurate to what we see now. And yeah, if you look at, going back to what you said, Stephen, I mean, and also what you just said, Zeke, about, if you don't have like a foundation, to stand upon of principles and morality, then you're easy to push either direction.
That's right. Yeah.
But yeah, you look at how Alexander the Great came through, and it was, like you said, it was very easy, and it was, which is crazy because Egypt projected so much power.
Oh man, did
over
they ever?
Like not just the local region, but in that time globally, which globally was not what it is now. We didn't have like full connected, it wasn't as, well, it depends on how deep down the rabbit hole you want to go. If you're one of those people that think the pyramids were for UFOs to land on top of and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I don't really go that
May
far.
have been more connected than we thought.
But, that whole like geographical area knew of Egypt and its power. So, yep.
Yeah, so the next people we will cover, the Greek Empire, man. 800 to 146 BC. They were pretty powerful. They also rose with most of these people did have moral codes though to start out, and that's also a very important part. We're only talking about the decline, but it's kind of just like our country. Our country was founded on morals. A lot of these are the same. A lot of these superpowers were founded on morals or some sort of moral code, which allowed them to get in a position of power in the first place.
Yeah.
As morality kind of slipped away from from Greece, obviously, people started becoming selfish, and this just kind of rolls into. I actually thought it was pretty interesting that there was mention of music being vulgar, the young listening to vulgar music. And kind of losing respect for their elders and things like that. Homosexuality became normal, and they kind of glorified lewd and violent plays. homosexuality eventually progressed to pedophilia, and it became very acceptable, like throughout all the people, for older men to abuse younger boys. There was a rite of passage for young men to kill their slaves. Like they had to kill a slave in order to become
crazy.
Like a man, I guess. That was like a rite of passage. Eventually, civil war erupted in the nation and basically made them super weak, where the Romans were able to basically just come in and just take over. And the Romans absolutely wrecked their houses. But
isn't it interesting too? It's that it says, as they experienced economic success, immigrants poured into the country, and the rich quickly took advantage of the plentiful, cheap labor.
Yeah, that's another good point. Yep.
And it's important for us to do our own work so that we value it. I had a guy.
Man, that's so true.
On Instagram yesterday, some random dude, and he's like, "What would you do?" He messaged me. He's like, "What would you do with $5,000? Be honest." And I knew what it was. And I was like, well, I'd probably put it towards my business. And he's like, is that really what you would do? Like, I just want to bless you with $3,000, but you got to be worthy of it. I'm like, to be worthy of money, I will work for it. Like, that's what it means to be worthy of money, is to labor for it. And my point in bringing that up is that, it's like, oh, free money and free stuff and cheap labor and easy this and easy that. And that is absolutely, like with the Greek culture, that is absolutely a major part of our culture, where you get what you want immediately. You're bummed and hacked off if you gotta wait for something.
Yeah.
And it takes a disciplined person, which we have very few of them anymore.
Yeah.
Who will actually work for something over the course of a whole lot of years to learn a trade and excel at it, or wait months for a product or whatever it is, that is being made.
Yeah.
It's just another nail in the coffin, if you would.
Yep.
Of instant gratification, cheap labor,
and it creates entitlement.
It does.
That's why I've had this conversation with people too. It's like, man, I don't understand how people that live off abuse the welfare system, they have such a crazy mentality. They just expect that money every month, and they're pissed if something changes.
Yeah.
It's like, because it has no value to them.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I'm owed this. I meet the requirements. I will get this. There's no sense of man, I have toiled and worked and suffered and learned, and now I'm good at this, and I'm now on the other side of where this is now profitable or whatever it is,
Yeah.
But yeah, I like that you brought that up. I think that's something else that our society's definitely missing, is the willingness to work hard, the willingness to be patient for something that is of value, whether that's labor or a product or a service,
a skill.
And I think we're going back to that. I think more and more people are seeing that. I have noticed that a lot more people are less concerned about, and maybe we live in a pretty unique area. We live in a very people around here tend to be of a do-it-yourself mentality. I'll figure it out.
Yeah, that's right.
I think we have a lot more of that in this community than most communities do. But I feel, so we probably have a biased view, but I feel that I've seen a lot less of the, you can just buy that on Amazon, and more of the,
I can make that.
I'm gonna make that, or this guy right down the road makes those, and they're it's going to take them longer and it's more expensive than on Amazon, but I know them and it's going to be good. And if I have questions, I can go to him, or I don't have to worry about it because I know the person that's making them and I know how good it is, you know, or whatever it is.
Hopefully product.
Just plugging Patriot Bladesmithing. No.
Well,
but yeah, you know, I say it more as a generalization, but
well, it is
it's a good example.
In general, that's, I'm seeing a trend toward like handmade furniture and pottery.
Yeah.
And I mean, dude, you go to buy cabinets or you look at the cabinets, okay, in my house, and I have we have nice looking cabinets in our kitchen. I think they're hickory or something.
Nice.
On the front, they're hickory.
Yeah, the doors.
The doors and the face are hickory. And you look at them and you go, wow, those are pretty cabinets. It's like, yeah, and the rest of them are garbage. They're crap.
It's like MDF or something.
Yeah, it's like fiberboard. And stuff. And it's like, how is that acceptable as quality? Now, I'm not griping. I'm just saying that's the standard.
It is.
That's the standard for quality. And
it's all about how do I give this a facade of quality while keeping costs extremely low and making this fast and easy to manufacture.
Yeah.
When the door in the face is the part that requires the least amount of the strength. It's the structure itself that's made out of flimsy MDF or fiberboard.
Yeah.
And then it has to be reinforced with like bracing, cross bracings and
little
stuff, so it doesn't literally just fold on itself by hanging on the wall.
Yeah. There's a company I want to buy boots from eventually. They're called White's Boots. They've been making boots for over 100 years now. I think they're out of Seattle. And boots are $500 to $700 for a pair. But I want to get a pair. They will resole your boots for way less the cost than buying a new pair. And they're literally, I mean, they're using some machines and stuff, but they're like handmade. Like you watch them as they strip the sole back off of an old, like a well-used set of boots, and they like resole the boot and everything. I'm like, those are the boots that I want to get. And I am kind of a broke, poor knife maker a lot of the time, but it's like, if I were to buy a pair of White's boots, like the quality is there. Like you literally pay for quality. I mean, maybe you got to do some, like, I don't know boots necessarily. I'm wearing a pair of Crispies and they're really nice. So I kind of do. But my point is just like, some things you got to do a little research to find out, but like you end up buying quality and it will make a difference. And I mentioned that, like, there is kind of a trend, which is really good to see, getting back to the handmade. I mean, I even had a guy that said, I don't want any water jetted. Well, most of my knives are like 99% of them are hand forged. You know, basically all of them I make are hand forged. I'm coming out with one other design that it's water jetted, just the profile, and the quality is still there. But I had an older gentleman down in Kentucky, a customer of mine, and he wanted 6 of a particular design. And I said, I'm thinking about getting some of these water jetted, like this particular design, because it's been really popular and I know it'll sell. And he said, I want these hand forged by you. He's like, I want all your blood, sweat, and tears into these knives. And I said, okay, well, it's going to cost a little more because the water jetting actually helps me drive down the price some.
Yeah.
You know, on these
saves you time.
2 particular designs. Yep. Yeah. Keeps it the design exact. And I like that because it's the right mentality that he has.
Yep.
That, you know, the quality is there either way, but it's the whole idea that somebody is working for it and putting all their craftsmanship into it. And yeah, hopefully it's coming back in our culture, but I think it's taken a long run of us put up with a lot of crap and low quality and mass produced to get people to start realizing what actually holds up.
And like I said earlier, there is hope. We're touching on a lot of negative, but I think that's one of those things that, and there's been several things that I think are turning the other way.
I do
turning
too.
Back around, and that's one of them. I think people are valuing true craftsmanship, work, and quality again, which is how America was. That's really how it was, and I think that's coming back rather than just doing convenience buying. You know, people are researching things and like wanting something that's going to last, something they can hand down. Like I've seen a resurgence of American handmade and forged cast irons again.
I have too.
And I love it.
Yes.
And they're expensive, but that's something that if you take care of it, you can pass that down generation to generation. I mean, there's cast irons in America that have been around for literally like 120 years. It's like longer than people are alive. It's so awesome.
Did you know there's a company that's now making blue jeans in the U.S.?
Really?
It is the only company. It's owned by Jocko.
The Jocko Willick? Oh, I did not know that.
He has a line of boots. I think his boots are made in the U.S. and jeans. They're blue jeans. There's like one company in the U.S. that spins and combs their own cotton. And I think it's the only one left, and the cotton is grown in the U.S. and it is fully manufactured, and the jeans are made here.
Wow!
Once again, I'd like to get a pair, just try them out.
Yeah,
and they're expensive.
But
that's kind of the mindset that we need, is like getting back to American made.
Yeah,
I say that while I rock my DDS holster.
Yep, American made.
American made. Yeah,
right here in this
awesome
very
quality
building that we're talking in right now.
Yes. I love it. Oh boy.
Well, anyways,
sorry.
To drive back into it. No, I think it was valuable to go there because I think that's a big lesson. There's a lot of little lessons throughout here that I think are worth touching on. But what's next, Stephen? What's another empire?
The Roman Empire. So the people who basically took over, the people we just talked about.
The big one.
They were incredibly powerful, I think, at one point. I think they were
utterly dominant. Yeah, honestly.
So they ruled from 800 BC to 480, and they kind of went through kind of a slow burn to just burn themselves down to the ground. Like they were actually, they stayed afloat. I feel like much longer than some of these other civilizations. Civilizations. There we go. My mouth is just not working today. Anyways, but yeah, so they obviously kind of got self-indulgent, kind of burned up resources, and they really, honestly, it was like they built a very lazy culture because a lot of their people were, they talk about entertained by sports and entertainment, stuff like that. I mean, obviously, that's where I can't think of it. Like gladiators and stuff like that. That's where that arose from. I was working hard for that, dude.
More energy drink.
Yeah, apparently, I was just thinking Russell Crowe the entire time, but I couldn't think of
Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah. So obviously they were kind of viewed as gods in a way, actually, like gladiators and stuff like that during that time frame. Which
crazy.
Even
gods
us now, we like, we kind of see them as like higher people, which is weird.
That is weird.
To this day.
It still exists. Yeah.
Oh man.
There's actually a lot of leftover.
I mean, it's a bad thought.
There's actually a lot of Roman influence in our culture. Surprisingly,
very much.
Yeah. And that's why a lot of this stuff is very, very much the same. Obviously, homosexuality became like, and when I bring up homosexuality, I bring that up kind of importantly because most of these superpowers did not. It was not allowed when they went at the beginning, as the rise began. It was not allowed.
Yeah,
and then toward the end, it was eventually allowed, and then just like a lot of sexual activities and things like that, it started getting promoted. Pedophilia started getting promoted,
like in our culture.
And
because I think it goes from I kind of want to focus on this for a second, Stephen, not to interrupt you, but it goes from being illegal, not tolerated, not allowed to homosexuality, it's allowed. Now it's accepted, now it's celebrated, now it's pedestaled, now it's it's completely delved into, and
then what's the next thing that we can do that with?
Yeah,
it becomes it becomes predatory.
Yeah. So as that began to happen, it just promoted more laziness, more just like, hey, we're not going to really work. We're just going to kind of have sex with whatever we want to have sex with. We're going to have sex with animals. That became normalized. And as that was happening, obviously their resources and money just started to drain. They started making war with other countries to basically get resources back. So they were creating wars with
no way.
So they started creating war.
Romans were
yeah. Anyway, so they started having wars with different countries and whatnot to kind of get those resources back. They actually made a law that if you were going to kill someone in war, they couldn't be a virgin in order to murder them. So that was actually a law that was created. So then they started making it a requirement to rape people before killing them in war. So
insane.
Was that in war?
Yeah, that was during war. Yeah, so
crazy.
Well, that was anything. So you couldn't kill someone unless they
criminal?
unless they were no longer a virgin. Okay. So they would take the person's virginity and then kill them afterwards. So just more sin, basically, that was just getting promoted.
And just getting more and more disgusting.
Pornographic images started getting promoted and actually painted all over their walls. And then like the big thing that I see with them, and obviously just lots of crime and things like that, it was all that stuff was just like looked at as, oh yeah, this is how. I think the way they kind of promoted everything is like big, powerful, like people, like all their leaders or, influential people were doing all these things. So all the, peasants and stuff were looking up at this like, oh, well, that's the definition of power. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Kind of like what we see in our current culture, you see actors and stuff like that doing all this crazy stuff, and it's like people like look at them like they're gods in a way, and it's like, man, they are just doing so much wrong. But yeah, it just continued to get worse and worse and worse. They went through multiple leaders that honestly, it was like basically became a competition of who could just do the most crazy things. And eventually, like all these things, they came to an end, and basically they went bankrupt. Is basically how they ended. That's what ended Rome.
Too much fun.
Is they became bankrupt, and the people were pissed that they were no longer probably getting fed by the government and all that stuff. And
their population just dwindled.
Yeah,
because they started to view children as like unnecessary, a burden, like a problem. Again, a huge focus on self. The idea of caring for something and creating something bigger than yourself, like which is what the traditional family promotes.
Yeah, that's right.
Was viewed as it was not good. It was a needless, useless idea.
Inconvenience.
Why would I do that? I can throw caution to the wind. I'm having sex with, it's just a pleasure realm. You're just doing whatever feels good in that moment.
Yeah.
Instant gratification. That's something too that you see in a lot of these societies, but especially Rome. I mean, it became like very commonplace, and I think you see a lot of that with like the games and the gladiatorial. I don't know if that's a word, but the gladiator gladiatorial, dude.
Let's make it a word.
The gladiatorial representation. But anyways, the Marcus Aureliuses of the world, and no, but it was just, they would literally tear down churches and use those resources to build like homes for themselves and like just gaudy structures. And it's just, there's so many things that happened that I think it's why Rome is always, compared to America, because there's actually, it's got the most, in my opinion, it's got the most similarities. Yeah. And I really, I know that this is a sensitive subject for a lot of people, but the reoccurring theme of homosexuality is something that needs to be understood.
It does.
And in almost all of these civilizations that we've read so far, and there are so many more, homosexuality spins further down the degrades further into pedophilia, and pedophilia becomes accepted and part of culture. And this is something that, I've said before, and I'll say it again, and I'll continue to say it, is that in our life, if we don't right this ship, if we don't correct the direction we're headed and stand up and be more bold, we will see what's already referred to as minor attracted persons.
Yes.
Accepted and celebrated in our culture.
Yeah.
And it will be part of our culture if we don't get things figured out.
Yeah, because it's already emerged. That's already a thing that's trying to get pushed.
Yeah, there were one or two different college professors, university professors, that were saying we shouldn't demonize pedophiles.
Yeah,
although they didn't use the word. They were like minor attracted persons.
Well, they're trying to get rid of pedophile because it has a negative connotation. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're saying like they can't help what they're attracted to. Like
it's a mental disorder. But you know what?
All lack of morality is a mental disorder. It's not.
We all know what you're about to say.
You better get it under wraps, or I mean, honestly, I can't. Yeah.
Well,
we can't let this go any farther. Is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And shame on us for letting it go as far as we have.
You're right.
The amount of conversations I've had recently about, how did we get here? It's like, and I used to say that too, and it's like, we know how we got here.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't have just treated the natural way of things as something that can just be tossed to the wind and it doesn't matter and it's just whatever makes you feel good. That's all nonsense. That's a lie. That's a lie that we have been told intentionally told for a long time. And that is literally every time in history that right there, that idea and that practice starts to degrade and destroy the society. And I have seen societies,
decline.
Rapid and exponential, like we're seeing now. I was in Afghanistan for a whole year, and it is common practice there for a group of men to take a child and go do nasty things where they use that child for pleasure, and that's as far as I'll word that. But it's common practice there, and it's not like no one's like, oh, it's like, yeah, that's a thing. Like that's a common thing there.
Crazy.
It's a lawless society. It's a what's funny is they have there is a sense of religious moral there, but it is not biblical. It's a very different religion, and that's why I firmly believe that the Bible is the truth, and nothing else is. I think everything else is completely different from it's the opposite of the truth. And I just say that because people don't think it's possible. I still have conversations today where they're like, it'll never go that far. Like, that's not, no, like, yeah, there's people like that out there, but they have problems and it'll never be accepted. It's already accepted all over the world. It's not, we're not far from it. And we're going beyond that. We look down on those cultures, but we are nearing the point where our culture will celebrate and loft that above everything else, and say,
and it'll be public,
and you will accept this, or else you're a bigot and you're part of the problem, just like we're seeing with the transgenderism.
Yeah. That's why I think part of the solution is for men in our culture to speak honestly about it and have these kinds of conversations.
Yeah, we're not holding back right now.
You have to expose it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just going to say something super unpopular, and I'm going to say it's not like women should speak honestly about it. Men are responsible for leading their homes and ultimately responsible for leading the nation. And it is not up to women. It's not a diss on women. I'm saying it's a man's responsibility to speak out against it And men have been quiet for far too long. We have let our roles be taken over, and we've let our responsibilities, like, it's like leadership is not does not mean more fun. It means more responsibility, right?
Yeah.
And so my point is, we need to be men who are responsible, who will speak the truth to our generation. And that's everybody in it. And say what is true, and we'll be hated for it, but we're already hated anyway.
We need
largely.
to be bold about that opinion too.
Yeah, that's right.
So many people tiptoe around that idea.
Yeah.
Like, whoa! You can't say that. Like, are you serious? Today, with all the feminists and everything, you can't say that. And it's like, no, we should be saying it.
The feminists aren't
stopped.
The feminists aren't saying anything about the issues that are happening right now.
It's not tyrannical rule.
They're all on board with what's happening.
Yeah.
And the woke culture.
Yeah.
Not all of them.
No.
I don't want to say all of them, but you would not you would believe it. How many times I have said myself and heard other people say, where are the feminists right now? Where men are dressing as women and saying they're women and going through all kinds of hormonal treatment and surgeries and all kinds of stuff to try to make themselves what they're not. Try to look like women and act like women, and they're taking over. They're taking over, and then people are like, "Where are the feminists?"
Yeah.
It's like, I'm sorry, but they're some of the ones that are condoning and promoting this, and that is so frustrating to me, because I'm a happily married man, but I view women, how God created them, as being perfect and beautiful, just how they are. They are awesome. They are awesome creatures. Creatures as in people created by God, right?
Yeah.
They're awesome the way they are. And there needs to be no improvement.
Nope.
And no replacement. And it sure as heck doesn't need to be, they sure as heck don't need to be replaced by men pretending to be women. It blows my mind.
Well, and our society is celebrating that. Like, what was that?
Like, it's a good thing.
Reward that just happened.
Yeah, for women's whatever month that we're in right now.
Yeah, and it was a man.
Yeah, it was a man.
Trans
it's like,
woman or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah,
a man.
Why isn't there why isn't there an outcry of women saying the men the men came through the back door and took over?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and it's I mean,
it blows my mind.
It is crazy. And it's also I think it goes back to men stopped being bold.
Yeah.
And anytime someone says what you just said, where men are that's their role to lead their household, and people immediately think that's abusive and tyrannical.
Yeah.
And no, those men exist, and they're living in sin. That's not appropriate. That's not how you're supposed to lead. That's not leading. That's being a tyrant.
You know what?
And that's not what we're talking about.
What Jesus said, here's where I'm coming from with leadership. Jesus said, if you want to be first, you must be the servant of all. And his, whether you believe the Bible or not, a lot of people say, well, Jesus had good teaching. All right, well, let's go there for a second. And Jesus' point with leadership is, in order to lead, you must serve.
Yeah.
You must have a humble heart of service. And Jesus didn't use his position as God to power through everybody and take the lead. His whole life example was one of healing, of feeding, of serving, of loving really sinful people that knew they were sinful, of condemning Pharisaical people in his day for not living according to God's purpose for them. But it was a life that he lived of serving, and that's what I'm talking about, leadership. But Jesus also didn't pull any punches either. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
He didn't pull any punches when he was speaking the truth. He didn't tell sinful people they were good where they were at, but he loved them, but he didn't tell them they were good where they were at. And he also, he basically showed true leadership is leading by example and through serving other people. It's not kind to not be truthful. And for a long time, we've not been truthful about our responsibilities as men in being in leadership and speaking the truth.
I agree
in a kind way.
And we'll circle back around to this because I think wrapping up on some of those points will be really good. But did you have any other historical relevance you wanted to?
Yeah, we got
cover?
3 more here.
Okay.
The Persians. So their rule was from 650 BC to 637 AD. Kind of similar to one of the other. I can't remember who it was, but basically, the powers that be in that culture became greedy, wanted money. So instead of giving tax breaks to those, they actually just started taxing the people with harsh taxes to basically have money flow into the government and become wealthy.
Yeah.
Obviously, this became an issue because it just continued to happen. They continued to tax more and more and more. As the country continued to just kind of fall, there was another civil war. So, and that's what ended up. Basically, they revolted. The people did that were getting taxed and made their civilization super weak, and they were conquered by Alexander the Great with ease as well.
Dude, Alexander the Great was smashing around.
Yeah. He didn't get that name for no reason, but
yeah. True.
But yeah, I mean, they basically went into an economic depression, basically. And the people weren't having it, and they kind of had a little anarchy against their government, and basically made them so weak that a completely different type of people could just roll in and just take over. So that's an important lesson, I think, as well.
People are getting really sick of that in our country too.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but yeah. Anyways, so we'll move on. The Mayans.
The Mayans, dude.
2000 BC to 1500 AD. Yeah, they, I don't know, they just pretty much same story, different people again here. As moral values went out, they just kind of just lost touch of who they were pretty much. They had lavish entertainments, and basically just focused on a lot of stuff that didn't help their country. Like they just
focused on entertainment.
Yeah, they focused on entertainment,
non-essentials,
and just destroyed all their resources in doing so.
Yep, they just
crazy.
It says that the peasants eventually abandoned church, which was pretty cool that was put in there. And their morality and whatnot basically just kind of depleted.
Looks like they abandoned the church because they didn't have time, because they were working them so hard.
Yeah.
Because they increased their workload so much that they really didn't have time for anything else.
Yep.
Like they were just sounds like they were kind of like slaves almost.
Yeah, their leadership basically made it so it was just like a work first environment with no time for anything else, pretty much.
Which that's really important because our society values being busy.
Oh man.
You know, like I've heard it so many times, you know, like when you say, "Hey man," and I'm guilty of this. Like, "Hey man, how's it going?" Whew, busy, man. And
super busy.
People say it like, "Oh, that's such a noble thing."
Yeah.
And it's good to have good work ethic, and it's good to have ambition and have things going on. But it's also very good to have margin in your life and to make time for what truly matters.
And we don't know how to rest.
No.
But yeah, what truly matters.
Yep. Yeah, because I mean that's eye-opening right there. I mean, creating a culture that values, you know, or even beyond that, just creating a whole civilization of people that just work, and that's all they do, and make, and consume, and then it's just that's it, and it can't last. It can't last like that.
Yep. And then the Inca civilization, they were from 1200 to 1533 AD. And honestly, I wouldn't say they're the best example of, morality falling. I mean, they did. Their morality was based on a motto: do not steal, do not lie, do not be lazy. Obviously they were hard workers and whatnot, but they eventually started really relying on slavery in order to get work done, which then kind of screwed up their moral fibers.
They definitely had problems with like the value of human life.
Yeah.
Like the Incan cultures had a lot of sacrifice.
Like human sacrifice and stuff.
Yeah, I went to Machu Picchu, actually.
Oh, did you?
I did. And easily one of the coolest things I've ever seen in
Really?
my life. It's worth going. It is. I understand why it's one of the 7 wonders.
Where is that at again?
It's in Peru.
Okay, I thought maybe it was.
And it's incredible.
Really?
It is a paradise. Like I can see how it's literally at the top of this, or not at the top of a mountain. It's right in the valley of a mountain called Huayna Picchu.
Okay.
Which is like the mountain that's behind it. You always see the picture of like the old ancient city, and then there's like this big pointed mountain behind it. That's Huayna Picchu. But
that's what
Machu Picchu, the city, is right there, and or the ruins, and it's incredible. They still to this day have a spring that has running water that flows all throughout the city.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's cool.
Whoa.
Didn't they sacrifice off of Huayna Picchu?
They did.
That's what they said to Trump. I want to peach you. Random.
No.
Sorry.
Dude,
Boo.
just a
No, I'm
dad
just kidding.
joke just getting thrown in.
Yeah, that was a dad
Nice.
joke.
I liked it.
That's crazy.
But they definitely had a lot of weird, very strange moral framework as far as
Well, I think a lot of these
yeah
people did.
the value of human life was
like
not there.
The
Yeah.
Babylonians,
so
the
sad.
Hittites, they all had they worship multiple gods, and
Yeah.
it was kind of wild and out there. Yeah. But yeah, so they ended up having a civil war as well, and actually were conquered by Spain.
Yep.
Obviously, Spain had military weapons and stuff like that. They actually had guns and armor, and yeah, they kind of made easy work of it, I'm pretty sure. But
Yeah.
but yeah, that's kind of our last. And you might be saying, man, that's not even recent at all. But you look at history and you don't have any. America's the closest thing that we've seen to a superpower since those days.
Yep.
You could argue like
Britain was
British
pretty
maybe,
powerful.
yeah, the British Empire, but they were kind of pee-pee slapped by us, honestly. So
Yeah.
that's kind of all our, examples of history, because yeah, there's not much out there. I mean, the Soviet Union, you could argue, but they kind of, I don't know, they kind of got destroyed by Chernobyl. Honestly, it's kind of what took them out of the fight. But
That's a lot of good examples, though. I mean, over the course of ancient history, but I mean, the whole thing about bringing them up is that it's you see it repeated. Like that's a very repeatable thing. It's not just some claim like, oh, our morals have declined and that's why we're going down the tubes. It's like, yeah, our morals have declined, we're going down the tubes, and you can see that it's happened multiple times before.
Yeah.
And the signs are all there.
And it's not just like, oh, it's happened and sometimes it failed. It's literally every time.
Yeah.
Every major civilization has collapsed due to pretty much the same stuff. So, which really you could sum all that up to selfishness and complete abandonment of something bigger than yourself, and just in complete contrast to God and God's plan.
Yeah.
That's what it is at its summary. It's interest on self, and nothing else matters. All that matters is how I feel and how I can get pleasure and desire right now.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's the problem.
It's kind of like, I don't know if you guys have ever heard the little saying, give a child everything and he will hate you for it.
Yeah.
And it's true. I give my children good things, but I'm careful about how I do it.
Yeah.
And my wife and I are actually careful around Christmas time and birthdays, because I've got 8 brothers and sisters, and a lot of them live around here. And then my wife has got 6 brothers and sisters, and several live in the area, and both our sets of parents do. That adds up to a lot of presents for each of my kids. And we've seen around Christmas time and birthdays and stuff, they can't handle all of the goodness. They can't handle, like their little brain is not made to be able to process all of the free things given to them without, like we've seen it sour them. So there, often we talk about like, how do we manage this? How do we cut back? Not just so the house doesn't fill with stuff, but how do we cut back so we don't like ruin our kids' joy in what they're getting?
Yeah.
Because we see it. And the reason I mention that is, give a child everything they want and they'll hate you and resent you for it. When you cater to all the things that they want and their perceived needs, like the parent knows better than the child. They're the one that has the life experience, right?
Yeah.
In the same way, give a society everything it wants and it'll hate you in the end and destroy itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what we've done.
Yep.
Or at least where we're headed.
Where we're headed.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Where we're headed.
There's one
Fast track.
quote I wanted
sure.
I wanted to read too, now that we kind of got through, I kind of mentioned it earlier, but like all of those examples basically rose to power with some sort of moral code, most of them with some sort of religious backing. Not all of them, but I would say I think there's only one that maybe didn't. But this is from George Washington. He says, "Let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Reasons and experience both forbid us to accept that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religion and principle." Basically, I think it's cool that he says reason and experience both forbid us to think that way, because he's basically saying, you look at basically all the things we just went over.
Yeah, that's right.
And, they needed religious principle in order for the morality to stick within their,
that's right,
within their country or civilization, whatever it may have been. So,
yeah,
it's a unifying foundation.
Yeah.
It's something that we don't have anymore. Yeah. This is part of the problem, going back to truth. I think this would be a good opportunity to come back to truth.
Yeah.
If you don't have a agreed upon objective truth and everyone has your truth, then no one fundamentally sees eye to eye anymore.
Yeah.
If your truth is that you're a woman and my truth is that, well, you're very clearly a man. And then you say something to the effect of, well, I may present as a man, but I'm a woman.
Things aren't going to go well.
It doesn't make any sense. You can't. There's no availability for any further discussion because there's no fundamental common knowledge or common truth.
That's right.
And we used to have that. And I think a lot of these societies did have that. A lot of these civilizations rose to power under that predetermination that we all agree, we co-align in this manner. Here's the rules we've set forth based on these principles, just like we saw at the beginning of our society, American society. We believe man should be free, but we also believe that man should operate under biblical moral principles. And if we can agree on these things, let's move forward in that direction.
And also, like, you talked about, free to worship whatever religion you want. Like most biblical laws, like the laws that were set, whether that's the 10 Commandments or whatever, that translates to most religions, honestly. Like most religions preach the same thing. Like most common, like, you even look at pretty much every single one right now that exists right now does preach something close.
That's why the founders said the laws of nature and nature's God, because there's a direct correlation between man's law that is pinned, that civilizations and nations largely agree upon. There's a direct correlation between that and the moral law, which is God's law.
Yeah.
And isn't it interesting that when you start fooling with, the biblical law, God's law, you start seeing actual physical consequences of it in nature. There's a direct correlation between the two.
Yeah.
You end up super diseased, and you've got mental problems, and you've got all kinds of insanity that you end up having to deal with as a consequence of, and that's because the laws of nature and nature's God, as the founders put it, are parallel to each other. They're connected. It's like religion is not separate from nature, if you would.
Yeah.
Because it's the nature's God who created everything, and he's the ultimate. He is the ultimate. He's a pinnacle of all standards by which all other standards are measured.
Yeah.
Yep.
So with that being said, how do we move forward? What's a step we can take to move forward? Well, I mean, an easy answer, at least for me, would be to form a relationship with Jesus Christ.
Right.
And I would love to encourage you to do so. If you haven't already got one, if you do have one, lean into that and trust that and surrender to that. That's something I've had to learn a lot recently, is that I can't rely on my own strength. I have to rely on his strength many times. But secondary to that is to obey that law.
Yeah.
And, a lot of people get confused here and think that means like, obey the law. Well, I better go do a tax stamp on my brace. That's not, we're referring to the law that you just described, Zeke.
The moral law.
Yes.
Yeah.
The moral law.
Yeah.
And also understanding that, government is instituted by God. It was designed by God, and we are supposed to respect the law and the authority that puts that law in place, because government is instituted by God. And I believe that people are chosen to be where they're supposed to be when they're supposed to be there.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm not saying that voting doesn't matter. I think people can get very hyper focused on the wrong points, I think, in this type of discussion. But the other important thing to understand is that if the law starts to go against the natural law or the biblical principles or the moral law, as you said, then that's no longer the law.
That's right.
We stick with our principles and follow the moral law. And that is something that is very important to understand and adhere to and build in your life and in your characteristics, because in a world where there is no law, lawlessness, and again, a lot of this podcast talks about the potential of that one day.
Yeah.
And we're not doing this podcast to say it's going to happen, but a lot of what we cover, right, Stephen? Talking about tactics and, like we just did one on 2 to 3 man sniper teams, and it's predicated around the idea that there may be a society of lawlessness.
Yeah.
And when there's no one controlling and telling you what you can do, what law do you adhere to? You have to have existing a personal constitution, a personal moral code.
That's right.
To adhere to. And if you don't have that, you'll be no different than any other evildoer out there.
That's right.
And I think that's very important to really think on and really consider. You see it time and time again when you start looking at historical, like natural disasters, things around the world. People that were in the community that were looked at as being good people, quote unquote good people, became warlords and criminals, and just started just taking advantage of the weak and the vulnerable. And it happens time and time again because they're not self-governing under a moral code or moral law.
Yeah, they have no standard.
Yep.
In and of themselves. And yeah, that's why, like Stephen, the quotes that you read in the beginning by John Adams and stuff, that this form of government can only be kept, and it can only endure if it's kept by moral men.
Yeah.
And so you have to have a standard. And the example that was given, Stephen, that you gave of these other civilizations, they have a common thread running through all of them. Are their religions all the same? No. But there's this concept that there is a universal moral standard that flows through every type of civilization.
Yep.
That is the law of nature, and nature's God. And when that is diverted from, when that's ignored, it will, in the end, result in the collapse of that civilization. And so it's like whether you believe in God or not, or whether you take your belief in God serious in such a way, that it changes your life, whether you read the Bible or not, that's undeniable, right?
Yep. Yeah.
That's undeniable. And then kind of the flip side of some of that is anarchy. And can we touch on that just a little bit?
Yeah.
There's a lot of anarchists that would say, yeah, I mean, maybe even some who listen to this podcast who say anarchy is the solution. One thing I found in discussing things with people is it's really important to define what a person means by that. And I had a conversation with a guy online a while back, and he said he's kind of an anarchist. I don't know if he was a true anarchist, but he was pretty close. Basically saying all the institutions are super corrupt and kind of like we got to start over. But I saw a quote recently, and it's by Fred Autonom, whoever that is. I haven't heard of him.
Nice.
Have you heard of him?
No. I thought you were going to say Fred Flintstone.
May as well have been. No, but it was an interesting quote that I saw on Instagram, and by a guy who I think kind of calls himself an anarchist.
Okay.
And the quote is, "To say an anarchist society would be devoid of morality ignores the entire reason people are anarchists. The only reason to be an anarchist is the realization that the state itself is an immoral institution. Anarchism is rooted in a belief in morality." Maybe I should read that again.
Go for it.
To say an anarchist society would be devoid of morality ignores the entire reason people are anarchists. The only reason to be an anarchist is the realization that the state itself is an immoral institution. Anarchism is rooted in a belief in morality. Now, part of that quote I agree with. I agree with the part of the quote that anarchism is rooted, possibly, depending on the case, the instance, in morality. In other words, they're saying what the state is doing is immoral. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think the thought is typically it needs to be overthrown.
Yeah.
Is kind of the mentality.
Really, I mean, with anarchy, it is not just overthrown, but torn down and rebuilt.
Is it to rebuild, or is it an absence of governance?
I think most people think about it as in tear it down, start anew, or start fresh. But in reality,
because that would be like a revolutionary, right?
Yeah,
a little bit more.
But in reality, anarchy rarely is that, and history proves that.
It's usually an absence of governance.
Yeah.
So I guess to kind of break that down a little bit, would you say the founding fathers were anarchists or revolutionaries? Because we call it a Revolutionary War, right? The goal was to not necessarily, delete government.
No, not at all.
But it was to Actually, what's interesting is if you read the Declaration of Independence, they write that document with some fear and trepidation. The reason being is the founders knew Scripture, and they knew that Scripture teaches us in Romans 13 that government is God's institution, and it's got a specific purpose, and its purpose is to bear the sword, like you mentioned earlier, Stephen, to bear the sword to punish evil and to reward good. And when it's got that flipped, it is an immoral government, and it either needs to be changed. This is according to the founders. It either needs to be changed, like either done away with and a new one instituted, or the appropriate measures need to be taken to make adjustments within that government so that it ends up fulfilling the purpose for which God intended it. So they didn't take it lightly. Anybody who thinks that they did needs to go back and read the Declaration.
Yeah.
The problem that I have with the idea of anarchy is that it says, in this quote at least, is that it says, the only reason to be an anarchist is the realization that the state itself is an immoral institution. That is very incorrect. Maybe it's saying that the institution itself is immoral. Are they saying has taken an immoral stance? I could maybe agree with that. That you're an anarchist because you believe that the state has taken an immoral stance. But this makes it sound like the state itself. In other words, do away with the state because it is immoral. That to me sounds like do away with any and every governing body because we don't need them.
Yeah.
Right? But we know how that ends up.
Yeah, it meets the same end because it's again promoting selfishness over service.
Yeah. And it results in tyranny. We saw it in Chaz, right? The Seattle Autonomous Zone or whatever that thing was.
Yeah.
And they ended up setting up their own leadership.
Yep.
And it was violent and it was authoritarian. It wasn't all it was cracked up to be. It's like, give us the old ways.
It was terrible. Yeah.
It's like, give us the old ways.
They were keeping people from leaving and weird stuff like that. Yeah.
So that was kind of that was a little experiment in anarchy, and it didn't end well.
No. Because to answer your question, I don't think the founders were anarchists.
Right.
Not at all.
I don't think they were either.
They didn't try to overthrow their government. That was something that happened later. They set off to establish a new colony and to come together and form a new governance that was agreed upon and that fit their moral foundations.
Yeah.
And they operated it off of, the common law of the time, which was which again was mainly biblical.
Right.
And it still stands today, and it does still work. I view the idea of anarchy as very selfish and very lazy. It's easy to sit around and wait or hope or plot the destruction of a system.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually we saw, countless times where that's ultimately what was the downfall of those civilizations that we were just talking about. That was like the
Civil War and stuff, right?
Yeah, that was like the last, that's the straw that broke the camel's back on multiple accounts. And it's because the people, sat idly by and didn't do anything, and it got so bad that it turned into, just them basically destroying their own.
Yeah, and there's kind of this martyr mentality that exists around anarchy that is basically, and I've heard it said a lot, well, wouldn't you rather destroy a bad civilization and die with it than live in it? And no, because I don't believe that's what we're called to do. There's a difference between existing currently within the geographical area or like the control, I guess you could say, of a civilization and living in it. We are not supposed to be of the world. You know what I mean? The Bible says that that we're not supposed to live the ways of the world, and that again goes back to that moral code that we should all have. And like I said at the beginning, there's hope here. There's not hope if you're on one side or the other. If you're just keeping your head in the sand, you're just moving forward with this. You're just like, everything's fine. It's going to be fine. No, everyone deserves to be themselves, regardless of who that affects, regardless of how wild that becomes, and it will become as wild as you can possibly imagine. On the other side of that, you can't just look at it like everything needs to burn and be gone, because either way ends in destruction.
That's right. Yeah.
There is still time to be an active, bold, and upright part of this society, and to do anything but that, I think, is shirking your responsibility.
That's right.
As not only a citizen of this country, but as a man, woman too.
Yep.
For the women that do listen to this, this obviously isn't just pointed at men. Obviously, we believe men have a responsibility to take the lead in this area.
Right.
But women absolutely need to be involved.
Yeah, 100%.
It's something I'm really tired of seeing, and I've seen it in myself in the past, and the reluctance, whether it's apathetic, whether it's distrust, whether it's it doesn't matter, or complacency, no matter what it is, we're no longer involved in the system that is supposed to involve us anymore. And this is getting specific for American government and the way our Constitution was written. It obviously includes the voice of the people, very much so.
Yeah.
Predicated around those moral principles, those biblical principles. That's the important part, and that's why we can't agree anymore, because that's no longer our founding principles morally. I don't believe.
Yeah, I agree.
The reason it isn't, and this is what I'm kind of leading up to, is because men and women who believe that it is, haven't pushed that.
We've been silent.
We haven't stood up and said, no, this is where we need to be. This is what we need to do. We can't deviate from this.
Yeah.
So if you are someone that knows that we need to right the ship, we need to turn this thing around, then you need to get involved.
Yeah.
It is a lot easier to get involved than you think it is. It's actually incredibly easy to get involved. Yeah. I'm going to tell a quick story while kind of giving you an update at the same time, because this is something that the three of us and several others that we all keep company with have been involved with, and that is a decency issue in our local community. When was this? Probably last June. So this last summer, so June of 2022. There was a Pride at the Park event, which was the LGBTQ organization that held a gay pride event
march and
at the Sedona Creek Park. This is something that's happened for the last few years, and through the Constitution, you have freedom of expression, you have the freedom of speech, and
a symbol, and
so you're allowed to do that. Just because we don't agree with your lifestyle doesn't mean you can't do that, and that's not what this is about or has ever been about. The problem was that during this, a transgender person, actually transgender stripper, to be more specific, adult entertainer, got on stage.
A man dressed as a woman.
Yep. Got on stage in sexual clothing and performed sexual dances, and kind of did a bunch of sexual movements while being celebrated, and basically did a simulated strip show without actually getting naked, while kids in the audience held dollar bills, and their parents encouraged them to run up and throw dollars on the stage. And this is a public park in our community. with the playground right next to the stage.
And it was originally started as a children's park.
Yep.
Initially.
And someone took a video of this and posted it online, and it kind of caught the attention of not just our community, but it went viral. It spread around quite a bit. This prompted a very angry response from the local community because people didn't know that this was going on. There was also other issues like the fact that these transgender men, or these men were using the woman's bathroom to change and to get dressed and things like that. While again, there's little girls running in and out of there, running from the playground to use the bathroom and so on and so forth. So lots of just issues that a lot of people didn't agree with, rightfully so. And what I thought was it gave me hope for our community. A lot of people showed up to this city council meeting.
Ton of them
to express their
discontent.
Yeah, and outright anger about what happened.
Pretty severe displeasure.
There was another side of that. There was several people in support of LGBTQ that showed up and gave their side, and they did show up in quite a large amount of people, and there was a lot of conversation around constitutional rights, and you're trying to make us go back in the closet, and there's hate, bigotry. That was a lot of their side of it, and I believe the other side of it was a lot more towards this is not appropriate for children to be seeing, regardless of sexual orientation, regardless of who it was. If it was a heterosexual event, what happened on stage with kids being encouraged to participate in that was not healthy for our society.
And in a public venue.
Yeah.
Open space.
It was not appropriate at all and shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And new discussions for, or requests, I should say, for new guidelines and for action was started. So that was the catalyst. To me, this was more of an eye-opening event. We didn't care so much about the event as far as we did care about the event, but we understood that it's not like we were going to hold those people responsible for that. It happened.
Right.
It was more about how do we ensure that nothing of a level of inappropriate behavior is able to happen again. Not saying that LGBTQ shouldn't be able to use the park to do pride celebrations, or whatever they want to do, that they still have a right to do that, but we should not, no matter what you're celebrating, be able to have a sexual, very publicly inappropriate and indecent display like that again when children are present.
Yeah.
If you want to make it adult only, that's a different conversation. But the fact that we're, right next to a playground and kids are running around, and then furthermore being encouraged to participate in what is a simulated sexual adult entertainment activity is not good. And most people agree with that in this community. There's a few that don't for some reason, and I still can't wrap my head around why. Maybe it's because of a lot of what we talked about today. But I think a lot of us really felt called to do something about this. Yeah. And there's been a lot of people in this community. It's not just been us. There's been a lot of others in the community that are business owners, a lot of people that have had a lot to do with being involved, spreading awareness. I mean, getting the word out and trying to make positive change. There's obviously a lot of learning to do. I'd never been involved in a local political kind of event like this before, but lots of learning on city council meetings. But it was honestly just taking action and showing up, and you get experience and you learn and you figure it out. Fast forward a few months, nothing was really done. No changes were made. Several meetings went by. People were showing up saying the same thing over and over again. Well, if you do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result, then you're probably insane.
Yep.
So a few of us kind of band together to try to take a more proactive approach. We started meeting with council members, getting to know them, talking with them, trying to figure out how can we start to present something, put things forward. We submitted a few different writings, things that I never really would have thought we would do. It's not things that we enjoyed to do, really. No. It was just things that we realized as we were in it, like, again, what we said at the beginning.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to do something. Somebody's got to do something. Oh, I've got to do something.
I'm responsible for doing
God
that.
wants me to do this.
Yeah,
He's laid this on my heart.
Yeah.
And I believe these things, and I need to be bold and be honest about what I believe and stand up, even if it's not socially acceptable to stand up against something like LGBTQ.
Yeah.
And say, no, you can't do that. You took it too far.
Yeah.
I'm not stomping on your rights to celebrate, but you can't then go and take it that far and make it about this, what's now gone into sexualization and indoctrination of children.
Yeah.
Grooming. I know they get triggered at that word and terminology, but you look up the definition of grooming, and this fits that perfectly.
Absolutely.
Regardless of intent. I'm going to give that person the benefit of the doubt and say that they weren't trying to groom children.
But they were doing it.
They did.
Yeah.
So lots of involvement, lots of conversations with different council members. There was a whole bunch of drama that happened around. It just so happened that one of the council members was also running for a state house seat. I'm not going to get into all that, but it created way more hassle than it should have.
Yeah.
People got confused and things were conflated and things were brought into question. We finally started making progress, I think.
Yeah.
Making good headway, having some good conversations. Some really solid people were involved. And literally just the other night, this would be, when was that, 2 nights ago? Yeah, Wednesday night. So this is Friday morning.
Yeah.
We're recording this. So the 8th of March. Had a meeting to pass a new ordinance that was... new parks use form and parks use conduct, which is the important part.
Yes, this would have to do with what was appropriate to take place within the public space of the park.
Yep. So there was that. There was also a citywide ordinance that would cover much of the same thing. It was on specifically. It was titled lewdness and lascivious behavior, which was a subsection of existing code of conduct, but would cover specifically very sexual related decency conduct rules.
Yeah.
Not creating an overarching law, but just further, actually just all it simply did was very specifically and further define what was already a very vague and confusing and not very strong law.
I'd say it was just bringing clarity to it.
Yep.
Yeah, and everybody, all the right people at the council agreed that that's what it would do.
Yep.
The city attorney, the city manager, the city police chief, and the Parks and Rec board were all in agreement and all voiced the same thing, that this would add clarity.
And would not only add clarity, but would help City of Soldotna staff and employees in upholding and enforcing these laws, including law enforcement. Would protect the city from any potential lawsuits because of different ways to kind of what am I trying to say? Discern the law, different discretions.
It got rid of a lot of gray areas.
Yeah. And it also covered a lot of things that needed to be covered, like simulated activity.
Yeah.
Because there's still a lot of that, especially in the presence of minors, is still extremely inappropriate, and federally is still considered sexual abuse and grooming.
And a lot of it had to do, too, just to kind of offer more clarity on it. A lot of it had to do with intent. So there were questions that were floated by council members saying, "Can a woman breastfeed in public? What about that? Is she going to get fined? And what if I have to?" I'm in a public space and I have to adjust my clothing because, it's a little uncomfortable. Can I do that, or am I going to get in trouble? Or, what if, somebody's shirt's a little lower than people like? Is that going to be? And it was the point here is, the main thing here is intent. That's a big part. Not going to sit here and read it all because it wouldn't be appropriate to read.
And it's very long.
How specific it is.
Yeah.
But the point here is to protect minors in the community and give clarity to those enforcing it, and then also discernment. And it gives them the ability to discern whether there was a violation or not.
Yeah. And just really quick, I wanted to add that the answer was no to all those things that Zeke brought up. So no, you wouldn't get in trouble for breastfeeding or for ingesting a wedgie or any of that stuff. And actually, the city attorney seemed a little. He came off to me as a little bit annoyed at those questions. Like he's like, no, that's breastfeeding there's a whole other separate ordinance that protects moms that want to breastfeed. Yeah. And no, this is obviously read the beginning of this ordinance is where it says, that it was based on erotic touching and sexual intent. There's not, it's not just like, oh, I have to adjust my pants because I've got a wedgie. Like that's literally what was being said. And it became clear that questions were being led to hopefully garner a negative response, something that either wasn't well thought out or something that didn't give a satisfying answer. Satisfying answers were given across the board, and I want to reiterate that, like what Zeke said, the city attorney was in favor of this. The city administration and manager was in great favor of this. The Soldotna City Police Chief said that it made it way more clear, and that he said it'd make it safer for both the residents of Soldotna and the law enforcement because it gave a lot more clear guidelines. And then the fact that the Parks and Rec Advisory Board unanimously recommended this.
And that's 6 or 7 people on that board, somewhere on there.
Very easily too. We were at those work sessions. We helped, we had opinion on some of the language and stuff, and
it was very well received.
And it was very well written. My biggest fear with anything related to a new ordinance is I don't want to create unnecessary laws. I don't want there to be anything that is overarching or too much regulation.
Like an
very
overreach.
Against that. Yeah. And it is not that. I think it actually is the opposite. I think it gives such clarity that it removes any possibility for overreach.
You don't want law enforcement wondering what they're supposed to do.
And then overcorrecting.
Yeah. That's super dangerous.
The gray areas leave room for tyranny.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
So I like how clear it was. I like how to the line it was.
Yeah.
And it very clearly says to certain people that want to push those boundaries, who do intentionally push these boundaries, here is the boundary. If you push past it, there'll be consequences.
That's right.
So it's no more the city having to wander around. Well, wrapping this all up, the parks conduct and the parks use was voted down. It did not pass, which was very confusing because they asked all these questions. They got really good answers. They had recommendations from literally everyone you can have a recommendation from, including the people of Soldotna, as we had been going.
Showed up in droves and
pushing these. It was voted down. I'm very thankful that the ordinance was not voted down. I think it would have been, but thankfully one of the council members voted to table it, which means that it's been set aside. It's going to be on every agenda from here on out as an item that's still under review, still something that's being considered. It can be brought out of that kind of timeout, if you will, at any point by any council member. It has to be by a council member. But once it gets to the new voting cycle, it basically dissolves and goes away and falls off. And
new members of the council are voted in.
So this is something we've been working on, and we are going to have to continue to push because it's very clear that even within small, very conservative Kenai Peninsula, city of Soldotna, Alaska, there are members on the board here that aren't voting aren't making decisions based on reason and logic and benefit of the whole community, but are voting based on selfish desires, their selfish image of them, how they look to certain communities, and I think fear, which is also selfishness.
Yeah.
And they're not serving the community. They're making a decision against they're actually making a decision against the mass of the community in favor of a very small minority, which, we don't want to subjugate minorities. That's not what I'm saying here. Obviously, nobody's trying to get them to
stop meeting.
Yeah, no.
That's never been the point.
So I bring this all up because, one, I would like to ask that if you find that wrong and you do live in the local area, actually you don't even have to live in the local area because this is part of taking a stand against this across the board.
Yeah.
I'm going to have in the description some links so you can write the Soldotna City Council an email and let them know that you think that this ordinance should pass. I'll have all that information below. But more importantly, I bring this up to say this is the kind of stuff, and this isn't to say like, look at us, we're awesome. But this right here, we're just regular old dudes.
Yeah.
And I'm not a super smart guy. I'm pretty dumb, actually.
Me either.
I can't remember where I put my wallet if I set it down a few minutes ago. There's things like I'm not some super smart, like, it's funny because now just from being a little bit involved, people are like, you need to run for politics. And I just think to myself, like, dude, I would be in shambles. But the point being is that anybody can do this. Anyone can.
And your voice
should be.
And your voice matters more than you give it credit for. That's one of the things that we found out in spades.
Yeah.
In this, as very rarely I'll put it this way. We were told by members of the council that what happened, as in what spurred this whole movement on, and the amount of people that responded to the event in the park that started all this, the amount of people that showed up was an anomaly. Like, it does not happen. In fact, what was very interesting was we were told at one point that it was surprising how many men showed up, which doesn't look too good on men, because it shows that we just sit back, kick up our heels, and hate confrontation and don't want to be involved.
Yeah.
So
unacceptable.
That's where I'm coming from in that vein. It's like, guys, get off your lazy rear and get involved. It's not fun. I hate confrontation. May not seem like it, but I hate confrontation just as much or more than the next guy. It stresses me out. It's not any fun, but that's never really been the point.
And it's not glamorous. Don't expect it to be, like you're going to get a bunch of credit, or don't expect it to be like, we're going to sit down and get to the bottom of it. Like, it's going to be like a Sherlock Holmes episode. Yeah. No, it's very boring, honestly. Like, the meetings are like, okay, on the consent agenda, we're going to reform
the waterfront, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, and it's like, what in the world? And then there's usually like one part in the meeting that you'll pertain to. But honestly, I've learned so much listening to how they do business.
Yeah,
and
me too.
I've learned a lot about how cities are ran, and it's created an interest in me to go to other city. We have another city here locally that I want to start participating with. Because I think we all kind of live between both of them.
We do. They're like sister
area.
cities.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody goes to each other's city to shop and that sort of thing.
So I think being involved at the local level, the local community level, is extremely important. You should be involved in your local school district. You should be involved in your county or borough or whatever, your local munis or cities. These are things that aren't hard to do, and if you see something that needs changing, you can be the one to change it.
Yeah.
We're actually working at the state level currently. Again, we can't discuss that right now, but there's a lot that we're doing at the state level to try to get some changes made at that level. And again, that can be done. You can literally, as long as you get a representative you can work with, which try reaching out to yours, literally your representative, and see if they'd be interested in helping you. You get the ear of a representative and their support and their interest, and you can literally pitch an idea, and that idea can become a bill.
Yeah, all based off of one person mentioning it.
Yep. It's not some crazy, you got to pay somebody off, and, there is some of that goes on, but the reason all that's allowed to go on is because regular people haven't been involved. I believe.
Yeah, I agree. Can I mention something, too, just in reference to the church?
Sure.
In general, there's, in some parts of the country, I've definitely seen it here, there's a little bit of a mentality that all we do is preach the gospel, and I've heard this over and over again. I mentioned it to you, at least, Jacob, that there's this mentality that you can't legislate morality. And I've had a couple of pastors and a family member or two mention it to me. I think just one family member. And And I agree with the statement that you can't, through legislation, change a person's heart, right? The point is kind of like the only thing that changes a person's heart is relationship with God, which I 100% agree with. But I challenge that mentality based on Scripture, which is what we've referenced already, and that is that government is God's idea. And if you look at Romans 13, it says that God's purpose for government is to, it's his servant for good, to punish those who do evil and reward those who do good. And I would just ask the question, what is that? What is the punishment of evil and the rewarding of good? It's legislating morality. God's intent for government is not to change a person's heart. God's intent for government is to legislate morality. It is to be legislated. It's to be legislated not by the individual person per se, but it's to be legislated by the state.
Yep.
And government is God's institution. So God is, the creator is not, he is not one who condones anarchy or lack of government. Government is his idea. And as such, it is the responsibility of leadership within the church, leadership and kind of the layman, if you would, within the church, to realize that God's purpose for government is doing what is right and to bear the sword for good. And if they're not doing that, why aren't you holding them accountable?
Yep.
And
that's where we come in.
That's right where we come in. It's hold them accountable, especially in the United States of America. We are expected to be involved in government, at least in holding them accountable, showing up, being involved. And so, can we change the hearts of men through legislation? No, we cannot. But the flip side of that is God's intent for government is to legislate morality, to punish evil and reward good. And that's clearly seen in Scripture. So I say that because in my own life, I've had resistance to it and had kind of this open question in my mind as to whether, man, is it okay to be involved? I mean, the gospel changes lives. Eternity is what matters. Yeah, 100%. I'm all on board with that. But don't leave the other thing undone, which is, God wants government to do what is right.
Yeah.
So,
and in kind of a caveat to that would be that I wanted to mention would be there's a lot of conversation and a lot of perspective circulating around the idea that our voice doesn't matter anymore and that everything's corrupt, and so nothing matters. And I disagree. Because government is instituted by God. Yeah. And yes, things aren't good right now. And that's because we live in a fallen world. And again, it's because, I think the fabric of our society's morality is gone. It's starting to tatter and fade away. But we aren't a fallen society yet. And I think to just conveniently live off the idea of like my voice doesn't matter, everything's corrupt, I can't make a difference, is just being complacent and lazy. And you're not actually being someone that's going to be helping anything. And I have a hard time believing that you'll be able to stand up for what's good and protect yourself and your family and your community when the time arises if you can't even do that now by showing up to a meeting or sitting down and writing an email. I've said this time and time again, but this is easy stuff. It doesn't take that much time. It does take time, and it's not fun, but it's easy. And has it ever been hard?
It doesn't have to be. What you write or what you say doesn't have to be worded well.
No, it doesn't.
That's the thing either. It's the fact that you're saying it. It's you're a number, kind of, but you're one more number. Yep. Meaning they care. We have heard from talking to them, they've said, we got 5 emails last night, or we got 6 emails last night in support of this or against this.
Yeah.
They're counting.
They are.
They're paying attention. And if you're a little hacked off when you send the email and it comes through,
that's okay.
It's honest. It's honest. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Be appropriate, but it's okay to vent a little bit sometimes and make them realize just how serious this is.
And if you are someone that's articulate and you're a wordsmith,
that'd be much better. But
then have fun. Well, I don't think it's better either way. But lean into that strength. Have fun with that.
Yeah.
take the time to sit down and craft something that has a lot of meaning behind it, makes a lot of good points, something that when they read it, they're like, oh boy, like, this guy is going to be annoying to deal with.
And that'll impress them too.
It will, or it'll scare them, which both are good.
Yeah.
So, but either way, even just, you guys are stupid for you're not passing this ordinance. It doesn't make any sense to me. And that's all it was. Doesn't matter. It all has meaning. And if you're adding to the pool of people that are upset, then it can't, that's where it starts to make a difference.
Yeah, that's right.
Your singular voice, I don't want to say it doesn't have meaning, but it obviously carries a lot less weight, I'll say.
That's right.
Than the voice of many. So, and that's where we've lost it, is everyone has this mentality of like, my voice doesn't matter. And it's like, no, your singular voice does matter, and it will carry a lot of weight if you go and garner the similar voices from others.
Yeah.
And you send that together. We can turn this thing around. I firmly believe that, and we just have to trust God. Ultimately, He knows what's right for us, and there's a plan, and one day this world will go away. And that's, if you study the Bible, that's biblical. That will happen one day.
Yeah, that's right.
But I don't think that's an excuse for us to just sit idly by while evil's able to run rampant and take hold. I think it's our responsibility as good men, good, strong men, to stand up boldly, stand up in faith, and say no to this stuff and beat it back and work with what we've been given, the attributes we've been given by God, and the boldness that we have, and say, no, this isn't right, and I don't want my society to fail. I want my society to continue on for the benefit of my family, and I love this freedom that we have. This is such an amazing country we live in. We're so blessed to be here. I mean, I've been to so many countries in the world, and every country I go to, I'm like, I'm so thankful I live in America.
Me too.
And more people need to travel abroad, I think.
Yeah.
But I think that's where I would wrap it up personally, and you guys feel free to jump in and wrap it up in your own way. But I just wanted to say that your voice does matter, and not only does it matter, but I believe we have a responsibility to right this ship and do everything we can to be involved and make a difference, because frankly we haven't been, and we need to be.
That's right.